psychology today. So you could just click the link in the site. These are all the free review sheets, and then you're gonna maximize the viewer, and then you just click out a little because by default it's kind of zoomed in too much. I don't know what happened there, but yeah, here are the review sheets if you made infamously by Mile Down. And then if we go to the behavioral sciences section, this is exactly all you'll need for the psychology sociology section. Here you could also go to the normal light mode of the review sheets, but just to match the theme of the site, just do dark mode, or if you want to have it easier on your eyes for all that long studying sessions, whatever, that's for you guys. So we're gonna go down to the page number. You can also search it up. There's a search PDF part here. It's working all right. I'm trying to make it work better, so any feedback is good feedback to improve. Okay, so starting with behavioral, right? So here's behavioral sciences 1. All right, so sorry, I'm gonna make sure it's like displayed properly so everyone can see it. Okay, so let's go over some tools you could use here for free. You could do study tape, where you cover the terms and you try to make yourself memorize everything, or you cover it on the side and you try to make yourself memorize. It's basically like the easiest flashcards ever you can make. So for example, if you want to memorize what William James did, use the study tape here, and it's active recall, so it's good for a lot of students. I used that a lot when I was in university doing my undergraduate. So let's start with the first part, which is about the researchers. So this is chapter 1 on, I think these are mapped all to Kaplan textbooks, right? So okay, chapter 1 is the researchers. So first is Franz Gall, 1758 to 18 blah blah blah. I'm pretty sure the years are not that important, but if you memorize them, good. But the test is more about larger picture ideas rather than just like straight up facts. But what you want to know about Franz Gall is phrenology. Phrenology, we studied a lot in school, especially for, not really for psychology that much, but in the speech language pathology we studied it a lot. So basically this guy named Franz Gall, he basically looked at the brain, and his theory was basically that parts of the brain are dedicated to localized regions of function. So for example, this part of your brain is for perception, this part of your brain is for whatever, this part of your brain is for morality, whatever it shows on these pictures basically. So certain parts of your brain are for certain functions. So for example, here is hope, here is consciousness, whatever, and so that's the basic idea they want you to know is phrenology. And if you read about the definition, it says it's a discredited 19th century pseudoscience. So the reason why they call it a pseudoscience is because it's actually no longer like considered a real science. So we don't, this is not actually true is what it's saying basically. All right. I hope you got the idea of Franz Gall. Pierre Florence is the next one. So Florence studied functions of major sections of the brain, used extirpation to study parts of the brain. So basically all these researchers are trying to find how different parts of the brain relate to function. So this is how Franz Gall did it. And part of his theory was that he would, like, as you see in this photo, I'm not sure if this is Gall, but basically they would touch people's skulls, and if your skull was bigger in, let's say, I don't know, this front part over here, this front part of your brain, whatever, they'd say that that part of your functionalism in this part is really good, right? That's what they would associate. But nowadays it's not like true or anything like that. And for extirpation, for Pierre Florence. Okay, so as you can see here, every time I type in Pierre Florence extirpation, it'll come up in French. So I have to put it in English. So you can just type that in, and you see Pierre Florence used extirpation, also called experimental ablation, to study the brain. So this method meant surgically removing or destroying a specific part of the animal's brain in order to see how the animal behaved afterward. So for example, okay, let's say for example this is the child's brain over here, right? And let's say that let's say that the front part, this whole prefrontal cortex of his brain was removed. Basically, that's what extirpation is. So you remove this part, and then you see how this person behaves afterward to see the function of that area. So that's extirpation. I recommend you just read a little bit on your own and actively kind of soak it in. Another good way of studying the brain was by William James. He's a big time name for sure. Functionalism, how mental processes help individuals adapt to their environment. So basically, James is saying that how we behave and what we're doing is good for like our survival, right? Dewey is also functionalism. All right, Broca is one thing we learned in a lot of speech and language science for speech language pathology, and they study people with lesions in specific regions of the brain. So this is a Dr. Broca. It just says Paul Broca here, but I think he was an actual doctor. And basically there were people with lesions in the brain, meaning actually this is actually a typo now that I see it. What the heck? This is a typo. Lesions, it's actually lesions. So he found this area called Broca's area that would be tied to speech production. So I'm going to search up Broca's area. So Broca's area right here is in your frontal lobe. And that's associated with speech production. There's also Wernicke's area, which was discovered by Wernicke. I don't know if he's on here. He's not on here. But Broca's area is he found it at areas related to speech production, based on lesions in the brain. That's similar to the method of extirpation over here. Okay, let's move on to Hermann von Helmholtz. He found that speed of impulse made of psychology a science. So what he did, Hermann von Helmholtz, is he measured the speed of a nerve impulse, and then he found that our nerves are traveling at a rate. They have a speed to them. So our brain is just a lot of electrical signals, basically. Even our whole body is run by a lot of electrical signals, which you will study in biology and physiology if you haven't reviewed that yet already. But he basically measured the speed of the nerve impulse. Okay, now we're gonna move on, and that's how you establish psychology as apart from just what it could be over here to more of a science. So that's why it says made psychology a science, because once you objectify things in numbers, you suddenly get more of a science. So yeah, that's his contribution. Okay, moving on to Sir Charles Sherrington. He found that there's synapses. So related to Hermann von Helmholtz is Sir Charles Sherrington, and he actually coined the word. Apparently, he coined the word. So he founded this word synapse. That basically between two nerve cells, there's a junction. So here's actually an image over here. I don't know if it's gonna load actually. But basically between two nerves you have this junction and this gap area, and it's connected in a way. It's not physically connected, but what happens is that your body will release, well, I don't know if it's here, but neurotransmitters, synapse. This is also how your muscles contract as well, so I recommend actually doing biology before you do psychology. This is how your whole body runs runs on electrical signals. And this is a nerve cell, a lot of people know, and this is another nerve cell, and they're kind of connected in a way. They're not actually connected. As you see, there's a gap. There's vesicles filled with neurotransmitters or chemicals, and then there's receptors that receive those, and this is the dendrite. This is the dendrite, and this is the axon terminal. In other words, this is the end of one nerve cell, and this is the kind of the beginning of the other. So they kind of connect in that way. But yeah, him is synapses, so he founded that, which is his contribution. And then we have Sigmund Freud here. So Freud, psychoanalytic perspective. Freud had a lot of Freud is very high yield in literally every single textbook of whatever psychology and behavioral sciences. So don't understudy Freud. His whole theories are, one of them I think are in here big time, in development, in a child development. So psychoanalytic theory. So he studied human behavior, personality, and mental health are driven by three core components: the id, ego, and superego. So this theory is actually mentioned later on, which will go over the psychoanalytic theory. So just remember this word, psychoanalytic, and that has to do with Freud, basically, okay? Okay, then we're going to move on to, I think, broader brain organization would be helpful for a lot of people, so we'll go to that one first. So your brain is organized by your hindbrain, midbrain, forebrain, and there's different methods to study the brain. So I will show you, you could look at the appendix for the full diagram as it says here, but I will quickly just show you a picture of the brain instead. Hindbrain, midbrain, forebrain. So here they are. So it shows you right here, for example, the hindbrain has the cerebellum. Why is it in purple still? Whoops. Sorry, it's supposed to be in yellow. So the hindbrain has the cerebellum. So the hindbrain is right here, and the cerebellum is right here. This picture is better to use. You know what? Just study this. Basically, just remember this. Remember the parts of the brain. The medulla oblongata is also there, so this is the medulla oblongata. The pons is just above it. Yeah, try to have and then reticular formation. It's not on here, but yeah, it's there. It's this part here. Alright. So yeah, reticular formation is this part here. And inferior and superior coculi, thalamus, hypothalamus, basal ganglia, limbic system, cerebral cortex. Just remember all these parts of the brain, and you'll be good. There's a whole full diagram in the appendix, so just memorize that. I don't know how you're going to memorize it. Maybe use Anki or use whatever you need to do. Spaced repetition, basically an active recall. If you don't like Anki, then what you could do is just to memorize this, is just cover the words with the study tape that I made here. And then just test yourself every day. Just go in and test yourself, Do it 2 to 3 times a day until you memorize all of that. Alright, let's move on now. Methods to study the brain. So this is really, this is actually a small list. This is just as EEG, regional cerebral blood flow. So I don't know why there's only 2 methods listed on here. I don't know why, but EEG So EEG is basically they put these electrodes on your scalp. Here's a cute baby with one of them, and basically it's going to record we remember we said there's a lot of synapses and stuff like that over here with synapses and nerves that have a speed of impulse. Yeah, so the EEG is recording all of that stuff, that electrical stuff, and it records onto like this graph. And a lot of different, not only doctors but a lot of different people, just different people could be able to read these graphs and see what's going on in your brain. Like people, I mean, as in like a lot of scientific researchers can read an EEG. A lot of different technicians might be able to read an EEG. And this EEG is really useful because later on you're going to learn about brainwaves, and brainwaves are important to learn about. So scan of brainwaves, because they will tell you about whether you're sleeping or what stage of sleep you're in, for example. So it can be very useful. And regional cerebral blood flow, that's basically how much blood is in that area. So I think they say like more blood means more activity. So yeah, methods of studying the brain. So there you go. All right, let's move on to probably the forebrain, because it's still a little bit of a broader category, which I want to do. And the forebrain connects to this area here. So right here it talked about the forebrain, and then it talked about the areas involved in the forebrain. Now we're actually talking about the exact areas and their function. So you need to remember not only the areas that the forebrain consists of, but you have to memorize the function. So there's a forebrain, right? Let me just remind you where the forebrain is. All of this area, this gray area over here, is your forebrain. All right. And then you have to remember all the different parts of the forebrain, like the thalamus, and then its function. So thalamus is a relay station for sensory information. What does that mean? It basically means that all your sensory information, so you know when you learn in school your 5 senses, there's literally not a lot of context on these review sheets, which kind of sucks. But yeah, so these are your 5 senses, right? Yeah, so a lot of the time you get, for example, your auditory cortex is in your brain too, but it has to send those signals to your thalamus first, right, before it's like processed. So it relays sensory information, okay? Hypothalamus, homeostasis, and the 4 Fs. Integrates with endocrine system, hypothalamus, hypophyseal portal, anterior pituitary. So what does homeostasis mean first? We'll start there. So homeostasis basically means that your body wants to maintain balance, okay? A lot of things in nature want to do that. So for example, your body wants to regulate body temperature. It wants to regulate your water balance, your circadian rhythms. Circadian as in your sleep and wake cycle, right? So it's balancing all of this stuff, all the resources in your body, your metabolism, your energy. And the 4 Fs, I'm pretty sure, is feeding, fighting, fleeing, and I can't say the last one because it's literally not allowed. It's a bad word, quote unquote. But it's like the fourth one is like involved with reproduction, right? And then it talks about integrating with the endocrine system. And then, so the endocrine system, this note here is basically how it relates directly to the endocrine system, the hypothalamus. So it goes to hypothalamus, the hypophyseal portal, to the anterior pituitary. So your hypophyseal portal system is like a special network of blood vessels, right? And they connect directly to this hypothalamus. And then, and then the hypophyseal portal connects. The best way I could put it is that the hypothalamus is connected to your anterior pituitary via this hypophyseal portal. So let's look at a picture so that it's easier to see. Hypophyseal portal. Alright, so here is your hypothalamus connected to these blood vessels I was talking about. Yeah, this is the part of your brain here that's connected, hypophyseal portal, to your endocrine system. And your anterior pituitary is here. So this is your entire pituitary gland, actually. Your anterior lobe is right here, as it says. Alright, so I think that's okay for like a quick review. Your basal ganglia smooth limb movements and helps postural stability. So I can relate this to people with Parkinson's. We studied about people with Parkinson's because I specialized mostly in speech disorders when I was studying in my undergrad, but we also learned the broader disorder which caused it. So in Parkinson's, sometimes they cause tremors, and that leads to very, I guess, the opposite of smooth movement, like rough movement, right? So it looks like this, where you kind of have tremors, you're kind of shaky, kind of. So yeah, part of their basic, because of that, they don't have smooth movements, and part of that's because, not with everyone, I can't generalize it, but their basal ganglia is probably not working the way it should be, right? So yeah, basal ganglia, smooth movements, and helps with stability. Now we're going to move on to the limbic system. So your limbic system is basically, it could be, there's like different parts of it, so I have to show you that too now. Okay, so here's your limbic system, and And I recommend memorizing that. There's actually more than 3 stuff in it. I think there's actually more than that involved in the limbic system. Here you go. These are all the ones here that are part of it. So go and do some more research about that. But memorize the parts of the limbic system and also the functions of each part. And now we're going to go into cerebral cortex, and it has 4 lobes. So I actually think they should have done that earlier on in the review. Maybe I should have done that early on in the review to help people better. But yeah, frontal lobe, parietal, occipital, temporal. So your frontal lobe is for executive function, impulse control, speech, and motor. So remember we said front brain lobes. So type in brain lobes and learn each of them. So your frontal lobe is here, your parietal is here, your temporal. Think of your temporal as the area near your ears, and your occipital is the back of your head. And basically you want to memorize that frontal lobe is for executive function, impulse control, speech, and motor. Okay, and then your parietal lobe is for a lot of sensational stuff. Just think of it that way, like touch, pressure, temperature, pain, spatial stuff, whatever. And then occipital is always visual. It's always visual. What does that mean? It means a lot of your visual cortex is here, so it's processing visual information over here. This is your front of your eyeball. This is your eyeballs, right? And it connects to your back of your brain, which is the occipital lobe. That's why they say that the occipital lobe has to do with visual information processing, right? And then now your temporal lobe, it has to deal with sound, speech production, memory, and emotion. So we studied a lot of temporal lobe in my undergraduate. So in sound, basically, in sound and speech perception, not production. Broca's area is actually here. So people might get confused because there's speech perception here, and then here just says speech. Based on the theories they had, I think nowadays the theories are different, but based on how the science was back then, speech, the reason why it's in the frontal lobe is because of Broca's area, probably, right? Remember we just talked about Broca's over here, Broca's area of speech production. Yeah, that's actually related to your frontal lobe over here. So without that kind of connection, it's hard to know. I guess that's what 4 years of studying does. You're able to connect all these stuff together. And then speech perception is Wernicke's area. So I don't know if that's in your Anki cards or somewhere else where you're learning, but definitely learning from these this review sheet is not enough. Kind of, you need a more fundamental review, especially if you like review from the textbook is a good idea, especially if you don't have a good foundation. You need to go back and reread the textbooks, right? You can't just watch this review video either. Cerebral hemispheres. So left is called analytic, or people have said that, scientists have said that apparently, your brain is in hemispheres. So your brain is basically split into half, cerebral hemispheres. So here's the 2 halves. So you have your right hemisphere and your left hemisphere. They just call it hemispheres. I just call them 2 halves of your brain, basically. And they're separated by an anatomy called your corpus callosum, which they also don't put here, but I'm going to put this information anyway because I'm pretty sure it might show up somewhere in anywhere because I remember studying it. So you have your corpus callosum that connects the 2 as well. And basically, people have attributed the left side of your brain to be analytic, language, logic, and math. And people have attributed to the right side of your brain to be involved with intuition, creativity, and spatial processing. And then it says here that usually dominant. The reason why it says the left hemisphere is usually dominant, the dominant hemisphere, is because of not math, not logic, but because of language. So people said this is dominant because of your ability to do language on this side. All right, so we have to hurry up. So nervous system and organization. So the reason why I'm going through nervous system now is because now we're looking more in detail about the brain and how the brain is the littler parts of your brain. So your brain is made up of cells, right? And these cells are called neurons. Neurons, says it right there, neurons. And so you have these neurons. You have different types of neurons. So here's sensory, interneurons, motor neurons. So it says sensory, afferent receptors, spinal cord. It's hard to actually learn from this review sheet alone. I recommend you go onto Google and you type in neurons and types of neurons like this. Okay, and then I recommend, alright, so here are the types of neurons. So I just typed in types of neurons in Google, right? And then it'll give you types of neurons. Sensory neurons carry signals from your sense organs and tissues toward the central nervous system. So you need to understand what your CNS, PNS is. This is your central nervous system, and your so central nervous system means your brain and your spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system means any of the nerves going outside of it. So you have the sensory neurons. They usually carry signals to your brain, essentially what it's saying when it says central nervous system. But your brain and your spinal cord make up this central nervous system, okay? And your motor neurons carry signals away from the central nervous system to control the muscles and glands. So, okay, let's say you saw something, all right? That sends a signal to your brain, from your eyeballs to your brain, okay? And it's going to go probably to the occipital lobe, like we just talked about regions and functions of the brain. So it's going to go to your occipital lobe. And then, let's say from there, your brain decides to make a decision that it wants to move its hand for some reason. I don't know why. You voluntarily decide you want to move your hand. So you want to move a skeletal muscle. You want to move a muscle in your hand. So what's going to happen is the brain's going to send an impulse out. And that is what we call your motor neurons, carrying signals away from the central nervous system to control muscles and glands. And then you have interneurons that connect other neurons together inside the brain and spinal cord. Interneurons are great, and I think they're used a lot for reflexes, okay? Okay, so if you have any reflexes or something like that, then yeah. But yeah. Let's see if I find a better picture here. Here's a good picture of an interneuron, and you might be wondering what location this is. If you have no idea, never taken an anatomy or psychology or physiology or biology course in your life, that's fine. This is basically a this is basically a cross section, of your spinal cord, and as you can see, your afferent neuron is connected to your interneuron, and this is your efferent neuron. So your afferent is bringing this in. It's synapsing. Remember, we already talked about synapses that do happen, and it's sending a signal out, okay? Okay, the next thing is reflex arcs. Interneurons in spinal cord relay info to the source of stimuli while simultaneously routing it to your brain. So reflex arcs is basically what I was just going to talk about, what I just mentioned earlier about your interneurons being able to quickly relay information. Central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So this should have been introduced first, to be honest, before we even talked about neurons. So your central nervous system is just your brain and spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system is just a way to say the nervous tissue and fibers, anything outside of the CNS. So your CNS just stands for central nervous system, is your brain and spinal cord, and then everything else is your peripheral nervous system. And in terms of like nervous tissue and fibers, okay? We're not talking about muscles or anything else like that. No, we're talking about only these things, okay? So your peripheral nervous system, PNS, can be split into your somatic or your autonomic. So what do we mean by somatic and autonomic? Somatic just means voluntary. Okay, voluntary as in like something that you wanted to do on purpose, such as your moving your skeletal muscle, like I just said. That would be your somatic, okay? And your autonomic would be something that happens literally automatically, so you don't think about it. So do you think about you forcing your digestive system to digest? No, it does it automatically. So that's what they mean by autonomic. And then you have sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic, F/F, stands for fight or flight. Parasympathetic means rest and digest, sorry. So think about your the classic examples for sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems is that when you're running from a tiger, what system is activated? Your sympathetic system, fight or flight. So, and then when you're, let's say you're Netflix and chilling with, I don't know who, your parasympathetic is going to activate, rest and digest, right? All right, now we're going to go into influences of behavior. So this is all of the cool hormone stuff. I didn't actually have to learn too much of this in college myself, but I learned a lot on my free time. So neurotransmitters are released by neurons to carry a signal. So we just talked about, oh my goodness, there's so much highlighting happening here. So we just talked about synapses. Again, I'm going to remind everyone about synapses. Neurons, synapses. Okay. So I'm going to remind everyone about the synapses here. So your neurons are, I quote unquote say they're connected, but they're not actually physically connected. You can see there's literally a gap here. So they're synapses, right? And, oh, why do I have too many tabs open? This is like it's not nice, right? All right, so you have the synapses. Release, and then so your neurons carry these vesicles, okay? They carry these like bubbles of chemicals, okay? And this bubble attaches over here, and then it pops open, basically. Okay, this is a really dumbed down way of saying everything. And then all these they have neurotransmitters, and all of them are going in here, and these are these receptors for them, right? So that's what we're talking about when we say neurotransmitters released by neurons to carry signal. So this neuron right here is releasing it to carry some sort of signal to the next one, okay? Acetylcholine used by somatic nervous system to move muscles. So I recommend studying biology before you even touch psychology, because all of this will be much more understandable. Right now, if you didn't study biology, you need to go back and study that, okay? Acetylcholine used by somatic nervous system to move muscles, also used by parasympathetic and CNS. So somatic nervous system, remember I said somatic nervous system means it's voluntary, right? Voluntary movement. So most of your muscles, specifically your skeletal muscles, are voluntary. Okay, so you're gonna, so at a motor junction, actually I don't know if it's actually at the motor junction, but at one of these junctions, it will release acetylcholine in order to move muscles, right? Acetylcholine also used by parasympathetic CNS. So just remember that. Dopamine maintains smooth movements and steady posture. So there's this theory, actually, about dopamine, where if you don't have enough dopamine, I think it's in Parkinson's. Yeah, in Parkinson's. I'm not sure if it's just Parkinson's, right? But if you don't have enough dopamine, it will also lead to like tremors and stuff. But if you do, it's going to maintain the smooth movements and steady posture. So a lot of us take for granted our motor movements, right? Endorphins and enkephalins, natural painkillers. That's all you have to remember. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. This is notorious. So you have to understand this, okay? Epinephrine and norepinephrine is also tied to your over here to your fight or flight and your rest and digest. Why is it not showing up very well? To your fight and flight and to your rest and digest. So if you have epinephrine and norepinephrine, they're going to maintain your wakefulness and mediate your fight or flight responses. So you can think of epinephrine, norepinephrine as your adrenaline, okay? Your epinephrine tends to act as a hormone, norepinephrine a neurotransmitter. That's just memorized. Just memorize that. Aminobutyric acid, gamma aminobutyric acid. Sorry, I don't know how to say it properly. GABA. So this is GABA. Just remember GABA, honestly. They are inhibitory receptors, act as brain stabilizers, and glycine has a similar function. So you have to remember glycine, okay? Don't forget about glycine. There are things called excitatory neurotransmitters and inhibitory neurotransmitters. I recommend understanding how action potentials work, which you'll know. I recommend understanding how action potentials work, which you will know in biology. So again, study biology before you do psychology. It will become a lot more clear about how everything's happening and what's happening before you study psychology. All right, and then glutamate acts as an excitatory neurotransmitter. So an excitatory neurotransmitter makes the cell makes the next cell more positive, call it depolarization, helping it reach the threshold to fire an action potential or fire an electrical signal. Okay. That's why I said you need to be able to study action potentials before you study anything about inhibitory neurotransmitters or excitatory neurotransmitters, because you need to understand the basic biology of how an excitatory and inhibitory action potential, how that even works, how the neuron even works to fire stuff. So basically, your resting cell memory potential is at negative 70 millivolts. I'm giving a very, very quick review because, you know, this is what it's for, right? I'm supposed to review everything so you understand, kind of get how things are related and the basics. So negative 70 is your resting membrane potential. Even if it says in this diagram, it's actually a good diagram. And then you get depolarization. When do you get depolarization? You get depolarization when you meet this threshold over here, negative 55. That's when it fires an all or nothing action potential. That's when it fires and depolarizes your membrane to a positive level, a positive 30 millivolts. And then you get repolarization. And then after you get hyperpolarization, and then you're back to resting potential. There's actually a lot more to learn about this than just this, but that's more for biology. So understand that this has to do with this whole thing about inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmitters. I just don't have enough time to go over that in this video, because this is probably meant for biology more so to explain inhibitory versus excitatory, but that's the basics of action potentials that I wanted to go over first. Okay. Serotonin modulates your mood, sleep, eating, and dreaming. So if you ever listen to a fun podcast, I don't know, like Andrew Huberman or something, maybe you might have heard of serotonin. But anyway, you just have to memorize that, use a flashcard, active recall, whatever helps you. The endocrine system is tied to the nervous system through the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary and a few other hormones. Okay, now you have to memorize these hormones. So cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone released by adrenal cortex. So your adrenal cortex lies just above your kidney. Here's your right adrenal gland. You have a left adrenal gland as well. I don't know, maybe you're born with only one, but here's an anatomy with someone with two. When people said cortisol was a stress hormone, that it just indicated quote unquote stress. But I think cortisol, as you'll learn later, it has a function to do more than just say that you're stressed, right? It basically has to do with glucocorticoids and stuff like that. So increasing your glucose in order to respond to stress. That's what cortisol is really doing, right? Just type it in Google. What does cortisol really do? Here you go. It also controls your blood sugar, manages and guides your sleep-wake cycle. I know this seems really not high yield, but this is also in your pen-cal, probably Anki card. So just like know stuff, okay? Testosterone and estrogen. These mediates your libido. Testosterone increases aggressiveness, behavior. Both are produced in gonads and released by adrenal cortex. This is pretty simple. Just do a few Google searches. Don't really understand this that well. But these are basically your sex hormones. Okay, next is epinephrine and norepinephrine. So epinephrine and norepinephrine, I don't know why it says it twice. But down here it says released by adrenal medulla, cause physiological changes associated with sympathetic nervous system. So yeah, just memorize that. Now we're getting into how does your brain, how did you develop your brain? How did that happen? So this is the development module part. So the nervous system develops through neurulation, in which the nodal cord stimulates overlying ectoderm to fold over, creating a neural tube topped with neural crust cells. So I recommend watching an animation. I won't pull one up right now, but I recommend following an animation that kind of goes over this, okay? Type that somewhere into YouTube whenever you're viewing this. And then neural tube becomes your CNS. So we're talking about, when I say development, by the way, we're talking about like how did you as a baby, before even becoming a baby, how did the brain even develop? So this is what they mean by neural tube. All right, so you have this, right? This folding over, and then this pinches out to become your brain. And eventually that becomes a child's brain. This doesn't even look like a child, but it will become a child, okay? Neural crust cells spread throughout the body, differentiating in many different tissues. Primitive reflexes exist in infants and should disappear with age. What are primitive reflexes? Primitive reflexes are basically like your instant behavior or reaction towards something. That's a reflex. Everyone should know what a reflex is. If you don't know, search up the definition of a reflex, and then search up the definition of a primitive reflex. And these are basically the reflexes that you're born with, right? So rooting reflex. Oh, this is high yield, by the way. Probably maybe not that high yield, but you should know this. You should memorize this. Rooting reflex, moral reflex, Babinski reflex, grasping reflex. So grasping reflex means if you put anything in front of a baby, wants to grab anything and put it into his hands. Okay, it wants to grasp things. Babinski reflex is a big toe is extended, other toes fan out in response to brushing on the sole of the foot. What does that mean? It basically means if you touch the baby's bottom of their foot, they're gonna extend their toes, okay? Moral reflex, and I recommend watching videos for all of these so you get a better idea. Rooting reflex means a baby will turn its head toward any stimulus, so it pays attention to stuff, it moves its head toward something, I don't know, like a noise, something, anything, any stimulus, okay? And a moral reflex extends their arms in response to a falling sensation. So babies know when they're kind of falling, they're going to extend their arms. And these are all primitive reflexes. Okay, next thing. Developmental milestones. So just read through this. Gross and fine motor abilities progress from head to toe, core to periphery. So there's actually two terms we learn in college, like in university. I don't know what we call it college. I'm in Canada, we call it university. But basically, we learned that there's I think it's called like cephalocaldal or like whatever. There's like actually complex. I don't know why they put like complicated terms to everything, but head to toe means you're developing literally head to toe, so babies are able to learn to move their head first before they can move their toes first. And core to periphery is like you can move your neck and other stuff first before you can move your little fingers first, right? And have this fine motor ability. Fine motor ability as in having this ability to control so intricately with your tiny little muscles that are in your hands, right? So this is what they're saying. Social skills shift from parent to other oriented. Language skills become increasingly complex. Okay, so that's it for chapter 1. And after you finish chapter 1, I recommend doing your practice questions. So basically, I recommend doing your practice questions. So you go in your practice, and then you go to psychology, right? And then you look for chapter 1, which would be here. Biological basis of behavior. You could also do it textbook style. Sorry, chapter 1. This is better. And then just I would recommend adjusting your difficulty level to foundational, and then I recommend doing discrete questions and not mixed passage questions. So by default, you have the AAMC standard and mixed, and the reason why, because this would be more of like a actual exam style, but this is for just question and answer kind of style, multiple choice. So I recommend doing this first, and this way you can test your understanding and make sure you actually understand what was being said in the review sheet. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to chapter 2. Where is it? So we're gonna go over the definitions first, and then so chapter 2 is about your, unfortunately all my cool features kind of ruined this part, but it's about sensations and perception. So your sensory receptors, remember, are sensory nerves that respond to stimuli. So they're receiving stimuli. Okay, so if you touch something, you have sensory receptors, for example, on your hand, right? It's receiving stimuli, and then it's taking that signal to your brain, right? And then that will go to your thalamus, as we said before, that relays sensory information. Okay, anyway. Sensory ganglia, collection of cell bodies outside CNS. You can just remember that. Also look at a picture. Projection areas. I recommend just looking at a picture of that, and there are areas in your brain that analyze sensory input. Just look at a picture. It'll help a lot. Let me just search for the picture. Projection areas. Yeah, here like some projection areas, projection tract here. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Absolute threshold, the minimum stimulus energy that will activate a sensory system. Again, you just have to memorize the definitions. Minimum stimulus of energy that will create a signal large enough for this to be caught into your awareness, so your conscious perception. Again, you just have to memorize this and understand what this definition means. The minimum difference in magnitude between stimuli before one can perceive this difference. So a difference threshold means basically if I had 5-pound weight and I kept increasing it by 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 pounds, 5.4 pounds, 5.5 pounds, what is the minimum difference in the magnitude before I can notice that this weight got heavier? So that's a difference threshold, right? Weber's law. This is basically part of the difference thresholds. Just study those kind of together, kind of learn about them. Signal detection theory. This one is a big theory. I don't know why it's just like one little paragraph here. Refers to non-sensory factors such as blah 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 accounts for response bias. Yeah, it does. I don't recommend learning it in this way. I don't know why it's only literally like a paragraph long, which is interesting. Let's go. So here's a picture of signal detection theory. Oh no, I can't use this picture. So here's a picture of signal detection theory where basically you're testing someone on whether they could know whether there's a signal present or if there's a signal absent, and whether they get it correct or wrong. So let's say there was a signal present, like a noise. There was a noise, and the observer responded that there was a noise. There is a signal present, and there was a noise. So that means a hit. This is literally the terminology that they use in this signal detection theory. Actually, this is a better image. So the response, the observer said, yes, there was a signal, and the signal was present, mean they correctly found out that the signal was present. Okay, if the signal was absent, but someone said yes, that's a false alarm. If the signal was present, but the response, the person said, no, I didn't hear anything, they missed it. That means they just missed it. All right. If the signal was absent, but the person said no, it was a correct rejection. So this person was correct. So in the green, the person was correct. They identified correctly that the signal was present. They identified correctly that the signal was not present. So that's why I call it correct rejection. The red is what the observer got wrong. Okay, anyway. So I recommend going over signal detection theory a bit more than this. Adaptation refers to down or up in sensitivity to a stimulus. Yeah, that's fine. Just learn a definition for that. All right, so other things about sensory. So this will go by pretty quickly. So we're going to go with hearing first because I majored in speech and speech perception, so we'll be doing this really quickly. So your outer ear is made up of your pinna, external auditory canal, and your tympanic membrane. So I'm going to get a picture of your ear, and I'll explain it super fast for everybody. So this is a picture of your ear that you might also see in your flashcards as well if you have flashcards. And the pinna is also known as auricle. Okay, this sounds so confusing, right? But it's just the outside of your ear. It's literally the plastic, elastic, whatever part of your ear where you put your piercings on your ear. That's the pinna or your auricle, okay? Easy. Next is your external auditory canal. What is that? That's basically this cave. What's another way to think of it? This is the cave where your earwax is, okay? That's called the external auditory canal. The next thing is your tympanic membrane. Wow, it sounds so complicated, but I'm going to make it easy. It's just your eardrum, all right? The tympanic membrane is just another way to say eardrum. All right, then you have your middle ear. So your middle ear, so all this thing in orange is your outer ear. This diagram did it nicely already. This pink here is your middle ear. Your middle ear has these tiny things, which are called ossicles. And you can use acronyms to help you memorize the different names. And acronyms help me as well, so I recommend using an acronym if you need help memorizing stuff. So Malus incus stapes, they're also known as hammer, anvil, stirrup. Okay, and basically these tiny bones, they're not really clear in this picture, so I'm going to show you a different picture. So this is what the cool little bones in your ear look like. And they connect together. Alright, so here's the malus. Alright, and then here's the incus. And here's the stapes. Looks cool. Here's a better picture of it. Alright. So they're in there. And then it says your middle ear is connected to nasal cavity by Eustachian tube. So here's this tube. This middle ear is connected to this tube. Nasal cavity. So people think, you know, when you mess around with your nose, it kind of messes around with your ears. That's the reason why, because there's pressure, right? So your nose is technically connected to your ear, right? So your nasal cavity, that's what they meant by nasal cavity, is connected to by Eustachian tube. That's what I meant. Okay, so now we can go over your inner ear now. So you have these bones in your middle ear. What about your inner ear? So the bones, the last bone, remember the stapes or the stirrup, it connects to your inner ear. In other words, it rests in the oval of the window of the cochlea. So the first thing you should think about when you think about your inner ear is not bony labyrinth, it's not membranous labyrinth, it's not membranes, labyrinth, utricles, canals over here. You need to know, I don't even know why it doesn't say this on the review sheet, but you need to know that your inner ear is your cochlea. Where's your cochlea? Here. This is your cochlea. Here's your vestibulocochlear nerve. Okay, I don't know if you need to know that part really that much. It's kind of, I don't know. But yeah, that's your cochlea. Okay, this whole thing in blue. And it has these semicircular canals. You should know these. Bony labyrinth. So this is all this labyrinth stuff. Inner ear labyrinth. All of this labyrinth stuff is just describing stuff. Your inner ear is your, okay, I kind of lied a little bit. Your inner ear is your cochlea, but it's also these other stuff. So just memorize it. Yeah. Labyrinth. Memorize this labyrinth. Okay, maybe I should go over it better. I'm gonna go over inner ear better. Let me do inner ear again. Alright, so for inner ear, I'm gonna do it one more time. So for inner ear, you have your bony labyrinth, which is filled with perilymph. What is perilymph? Perilymph is just a fluid. Perilymph. So the cool thing about your ear is that it turns this mechanical energy. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but it turns this energy, and it takes it and it turns it into like it moves the fluid in your ear, literally, to kind of then translate and make into a signal, which is pretty cool to send to your brain. So perilymph is the fluid in your ear. So you have water in your ear, basically. Membranous labyrinth is filled with endolymph. So you just search up endolymph. A clear specialized fluid. So this is another fluid. Okay, and then membranous labyrinth consists of cochlea, sound, utricle, and saccule, which have to do with linear acceleration. So cochlea, sound, doesn't mean cochlea means sound. It means the cochlea, it has a functional association with dealing with sound, right? Utricle and saccule have to do with linear acceleration. So let's say your body's accelerating linearly, this would notice. You know, your ear is a powerful thing in also rotational acceleration and balance. And that part of the ear that does that is semicircular canals. So they will help you perceive those things, right? Okay, projection areas. Projection areas, superior olive localizes sound located in your brainstem. Inferior calculus is your startle reflexes, also used by both eyes in the vestibular ocular reflex, which keeps your eyes fixated on one point. So I just wanted to go over the projection area very quickly. So your superior olive is located basically in your brainstem, more specifically your pons, and it's for sound localization. That's the primary function of your superior olive. So literally says that localizes sound. So what does that mean? So it's going to calculate kind of like where is the sound coming from. That's basically what it means, sound localization. Inferior calculus is in your, oh, why won't it highlight? Inferior calculus is in your midbrain, okay? And it is primarily functioned for startle reflex. So basically it processes any sudden loud auditory stimuli. So anything very loud, and then it will trigger any involuntary motor response. So if you ever get scared by a very loud sound, yeah, think about your inferior calculus, basically, okay? Now we're going to go into your auditory pathway very quickly. So you just have to memorize this, that, actually, I think this is messed up. All right, I don't know why, but the pathway is kind of short. But you go from your, I don't know why it doesn't start all the way from your outer ear, but it's starting from your inner ear to your brain, I guess. So the pathway is describing from your inner ear to your brain. So cochlea to this vestibular cochlear nerve to your MGN. MGN is already in your brain by that time, and then auditory cortex is also another part of your brain. So memorize this pathway is all you really need to do. Okay, vision. Vision is very interesting. I learned it, but it's not necessarily my favorite to learn. So you have your cornea. That's the very top part layer of your eye. So if you look down here, it says cornea here. I recommend looking at diagrams to understand all of this. To be honest, it'll help you learn the anatomy way better, easier. So your cornea gathers and filters incoming light. So just memorize that. Iris controls the size of your pupil. It's also the colored part of your eye. So what makes the color in your eye? Some people have blue eyes, nice blue eyes. Some people have green eyes, brown eyes, hazel, etc. So that is your iris. And it divides the front part into the anterior and posterior chamber, and it connects the two muscles, the dilator and the constrictor pupillae. Alright, so next is your lens. It refracts incoming light to focus it on the retina. So I recommend, again, looking at a picture of the lens. There's lots of diagrams showing how the lens will refract light, but essentially it's taking this light and then it's getting it onto your retina, which is at the back of your eye, okay? So that's the basics. That's the very basics. And then you have your aqueous humor, which is produced by the ciliary body. Aqueous humor is just another fluid. I don't know why there's hundreds of names for fluids, different fluids in your body, but there is. So yeah, it's just a fluid. Okay, and memorize all of this. Memorize all of this. Retina is your, at the back here. You see this, all of this green here. I don't know what it looks like in light mode, but all of this yellow, so light mode, it's in yellow, but in here it's green. All of this green area of your eye down here is your retina. And your retina is very important. This is so important because it contains your rods, cones, rods and cones, which are the cells for photo. These rods here. So your rods and cones are your light-sensitive receptor cells in the retina of your eyes. They're photoreceptors, right? So basically, remember your lens is very important to refract all this information, right? Refract the incoming light to focus it on the retina, and the retina takes that light and it processes. And actually, the way the retina processes is very interesting. It does the opposite of what you think it would do, but that's for another time. I don't know if it's in psychology or not, but yeah, your eye works very interestingly. So your rods will be able to detect light and dark, and your cones for color. See for color, you know. And then rhodopsin. Remember that rods have rhodopsin. And then memorize this pathway from the retina. Cool. Retinal disparity, space between your eyes, basically. Horizontal amacrine cells, memorize. Support vitreous on inside, sclera and choroid on outside. So this is basically what are the support, what's supporting your eye, essentially. And just remember vitreous, sclera, choroid. Search up pictures, search up where they are oriented to get yourself oriented as well. Processing, parallel processing, magnocellular, parvocellular cells. So all of these are part of your processing. So parallel processing is color, form, blah, blah. You just memorize this, okay? And then memorize your visual pathway, just like you memorize your auditory pathway. So your visual pathway here is going from the front of the eye. I don't know why the auditory pathway got cut short, okay? It's not from the outer part of your ear. It's from the inner part of your ear, the cochlea, okay? This visual pathway goes from your eye to your optic nerve, to your optic chiasm, to your optic tracts, to your LGN, visual radiations, and visual cortex. So a lot of people might confuse the LGN and the MGN. Don't do that. Don't confuse things for one thing for another thing. Know the thing how it should be. So your lateral geniculate nucleus is in your visual pathway. Your medial geniculate nucleus is in your auditory pathway. Okay, don't get those two mixed up. Okay, and now we can go to the other two senses, which people don't really care about apparently because, as you see, there's not very much notes on them. So the other senses include your smell. So a lot of people say olfactory all the time in sciences for some reason. Olfactory just refers to like your smell, right? So anytime you see olfactory, just remind yourself that means like smelling and stuff like that. Your smell is the only one that will bypass the thalamus. Remember we talked about earlier, your thalamus is a relay system for your senses, right? So the only one that actually doesn't go through the thalamus is your smell. Okay, pheromones. Pheromones have to do with smell as well. So basically, scientists say, okay, that there's chemicals that are given off by animals that have an effect on all of this here, right? So basically, the chemicals, you know, they might like make you smell good or something. I don't know. Just read up a little bit more about examples and what pheromones are and how it's related to smell, okay? And then taste is the detection of dissolved compounds by taste buds in papillae. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. You want to memorize this. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. I don't even know how to say that actually. But you want to memorize that. Next thing is somatosensation, which refers to the 4 touch modalities: pressure, vibration, pain, temperature. That's literally all you have to memorize. 2-point threshold, minimum distance between 2 points of stimulation on the skin that can be felt as 2 distinct stimuli. So 2-point threshold is like if I touch your skin here and I touch your skin there, how much of a difference until you notice that they're 2 different touches, okay? Physiological 0, the normal temp of skin to which objects are compared to. So basically how physiological 0 works is that your body doesn't measure temperature in degrees, okay? Your body doesn't sit around and say, oh, I'm at 35 degrees or 36 degrees. Your body measures temperature relative to the surface temperature of your skin, so it's always relative. So your skin is usually 31 to 34, 5-ish degrees. In Fahrenheit, that's around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So an object with a temperature above physiological 0 will feel hot. Okay, so it'll feel more than your physiological 0, if that makes sense. It's not saying that you're physiologically at 0 degrees. No, if you're at physiological 0 degrees, you would just die. So what it's saying is that basically your body's just comparing temperature relative to where it's at, and we call that baseline physiological 0. Okay, nociceptors, pain reception, gate theory of pain, G&D for pain. All right, so I don't know why. Okay, but nociceptors are basically receptors for pain. Gate theory of pain is another thing you need to know and memorize, or understand, in other words. I recommend going in a little bit more detail about gate theory of pain on Google or something, and then just noticeable difference for pain as well and how that relates to nociceptors. But I'll go through it really quickly too. Okay, so your nociceptors are essentially sensory receptors that are specialized, and they're specialized, again, as I said, in pain, or you can call it noxious, thermal, mechanical, chemical stimuli, that anything that sends pain signals to your CNS, right? to your central nervous system, to your brain. So the gate theory of pain is that there's somehow, the theory is basically that you have some sort of gate mechanism in the spinal cord that can open or block signals of pain on the way to their brain. So rubbing your arm after bumping it, the tactile pressure can inhibit the pain signals from going to your brain, and that's an example. The lower just noticeable difference for pain. So JND, just noticeable difference, is a whole another theory. So I recommend going over that theory first, just noticeable difference, such in Weber's law. Literally type in Weber's law like this, Weber's law, and then understand what it's saying here. Okay, now we're gonna go into oh, and by the way, why does it say lower JND for pain? It says that because pain has a low just noticeable difference relative to other senses. So for example, in our human perception, we're really sensitive to minute increases in pain. So that's why we have a small just noticeable difference. You're able to notice pain very quickly, and that way your body is able to know, even at small levels of just noticeable difference, right? That's why it's low, to notice that our body's going through something, a little itch if we could feel it. All right, so now we're on object recognition, top-down processing versus bottom-up processing, and Gestalt principles. So this has to do less with your senses and more with how your brain is processing stuff, processing objects. Sorry. So you can top-down process things, not just objects, but things around the world, right? You can top-down process things, which means you use your background knowledge. So if you ever look at someone and you have a stereotype in your head about that person, right? You have judgment. Based off of what? That is top-down processing. You're using your background knowledge from what you've previously known. Let's say you think someone who doesn't have that much money looks, dresses, and acts a certain way. That is top-down processing, using your background knowledge in order to process what you're seeing right in front of you. So then you make a stereotype right then and there. Bottom-up processing is when you take details and then you go into the whole picture. So it's the opposite of top-down, right? So you're recognizing the object by feature detection, and it's not influenced by background knowledge. So you're just looking at the details and looking at whether they make up a whole picture. And then Gestalt principles, I recommend just searching that up. So your Gestalt principles are basically principles of how your brain would process things. So for example, if you have, oh my goodness. So basically, when objects are placed together, the eye perceives them as a group. That's a principle. When objects look similar to one another, the eye perceives them as a group. When an object is incomplete or not completely closed, it still makes kind of like a shape here. And we prefer that it makes a shape. So that's how we're processing. So Gestalt principles are basically principles to describe how we're processing this stuff, right? So know all of these. And know law of premeds. Yeah. So the basic idea is that when we're looking at stuff that's so messy and complicated, our brains, no matter what, make it simplified. And that is the law of premeds, simply put. Our brain likes to simplify things in a way that makes sense and easier. So law of continuity, this could be separate dots, right? But in our brain, we're processing this as like a close line, some sort of line, really. So we made that up in our head almost. But yeah, that's how we're processing it. Learning. All right, we're on chapter 3 now, so I'm going to take a small break. Okay, learning should be relatively fast. So when we're learning in psychology kind of means something a little bit different. It doesn't mean like what you're doing now. One person teaches, another person listens. No, learning in psychology is more like, how do we learn our behaviors? So how do we build our habits? Why do you drink coffee every morning is a good question to start that with. And that is what learning in psychology kind of means. How did this person learn their behavior? Not about learning how do I teach in the student type of stuff. Not that. That's a layman's term of learning. We're talking about learning in psychology. So you have habituation, becoming used to a stimulus. So let's say you always hear a sound every morning. And it's nothing like your alarm clock though. It's always like this, kind of like the same cars going out and in, and it's kind of become a foreground. You kind of become used to the stimulus, so you kind of notice it less. It's kind of like habituation. And then this habituation is exactly kind of the opposite. When a second stimulus intervenes, causing a resensitization of the original stimulus. So yeah, associative learning, pairing things together. So associative learning is like, oh, I had a really good dinner with people that were really good. So I associate this really good experience with the food. And all of a sudden the food is good too. So I've associated, I've paired these stimuli together. So I associate now good food with good people. Okay, so that's an example of associative learning. Probably not the best example. I'm sure there's more examples, and I recommend after each chapter going through practice questions after that. Operant learning. Operant learning is where, so operant learning is a little bit different, and it should be separated like this from classical conditioning as well. What is happening? You should separate it like this. Like that. And operant learning is behavior through consequences. So learning through consequences. This is a good picture here. It's time for food. I should press the lever. Classical conditioning is where you're basically like kind of, I don't know why, but like classical conditioning is kind of like a lab rat almost. So there goes the bell, it's time for food. So you train this dog, Pavlov. If you know of the Pavlov experiment, that's great. But I recommend learning about that experiment so that you can understand classical conditioning on a deeper level. And another thing is just watching some YouTube videos on operant conditioning and classical conditioning, because it will explain it a lot better if you don't have the foundations about classical conditioning and operant conditioning. It'll explain it a lot better than just these words probably, right? But just for an overview, in operant conditioning, you have reinforcement, so something that increases the likelihood of that behavior to happen. So reinforcement could be both positive or negative. You can also have punishment, which decreases the likelihood of behavior, which can also be positive punishment or negative punishment. So it sounds funny in psychology when you say reinforcement can be positive, reinforcement can also be negative. But really what positive and negative refer to is that if you add something or if you remove something. So if I have positive reinforcement, so if I had a kid and one of the kids did something really good and I want to reward them, I'm going to, for example, buy them a gift. So that is an example of positive reinforcement. Okay, so that will hopefully increase the likelihood of their behavior. For example, they read 2 books in a week and they studied for, I don't know, 1 hour, 2 hours a day, for example. So then I would give a gift. That would be called positive reinforcement. I'm adding something that will increase the likelihood of behavior. And that specific behavior could be, for example, the kid was studying or something. And then punishment. So punishment will decrease likelihood of behavior. But if I have, oh, I forgot to say, that's a positive reinforcement. But what about negative reinforcement? What does negative reinforcement mean? Negative reinforcement means you remove something in their life to increase the likelihood of the behavior. So for example, the kid is distracted with video games all day and they're not studying at all. So what do? We could do a form of negative reinforcement that removes something, right? We're removing something in order to increase the likelihood of the behavior to do something else. And that something else could be, for example, I don't know, studying, right? So, and then for punishment, you can have positive or you can have negative punishment. So positive punishment means you are adding something that will decrease likelihood of behavior. So what does that mean? So positive punishment means, for example, I hope we don't do this anymore, but back then, a lot of kids said they got beat. They used to get beat or spanked, right? And that was a practice. That's an actual practice. And that is what we call positive punishment. You know, in sociology, I don't think they call it positive punishment. But in this terms of psychology, they're calling it positive because you're adding something. You are doing a behavior. You're adding a behavior, for example, something negative, like probably in a negative connotation, it kind of decreases the likelihood of behavior. I shouldn't have said negative. And then negative punishment is when I remove something to decrease the likelihood of behavior. For example, I remove the video games to decrease the likelihood of playing video games. Not of studying. That would increase the likelihood of behavior. But anyway, I recommend going through some examples and understanding that reinforcement and punishment can both be positive or negative. Schedule. The schedule of reinforcement can be based on a amount of time or a ratio. So what does that mean? So that means, for example, your behavior, if I want to train you to do a habit, I can do a schedule. And this reinforcement schedule can be based on a time. So every 1 minute is when I will try to get you to do the behavior I want you to do. Or a ratio. So every, every 2 times this happens, then this will happen, right? So ratio has to do with the number, but amount of time is literally time. So just watch some videos, examples, do some practice questions on that. Extinction and shaping, these are pretty self-explanatory terms to just read over yourself and understand. So extinction is when a previously reinforced behavior is no longer reinforces, so it goes extinct. So operant conditioning means, oh, you're conditioning someone to do a behavior, right? But then it goes extinct. So that means it's gone. You stop reinforcing and it's gone now. It's extinct. And then shaping, in operant conditioning, shaping means when the behavior is closer and closer to the target that's being reinforced. So the first time you try to reinforce the behavior, it's not going to be a perfect behavior. Over time, it will become closer and closer to the target behavior, and that is what we call shaping. Classical conditioning, I recommend going through this first. Pavlovian, classical, understanding the Pavlov experiment. So just YouTube about the Pavlov's dogs and stuff like that, and learn about that. And then it's not something to take lightly either. I recommend actually learning what is classical conditioning, how does the stimuli work, how does classical conditioning, do it in more detail, because you might need it, right? CS and US over here means conditioned stimuli, and it means unconditioned stimuli, but you won't understand these terms and how they're going to be used in context with everything without fully watching a video. This one sentence won't help you, this one sentence won't help you, to be honest, if you don't have a background in, I don't know, in learning and memory for behavioral sciences. You're going to have to learn it on YouTube or something on that for that one. Observational learning or modeling just means by acquisition, by watching others. So you're just learning by watching others. This one, you don't need a video for. This is obvious to understand, okay? Memory. Now we're going into how do people memorize stuff. So how does the human memory work? So just look at this diagram first. So you have sensory memory, you have short-term memory, then you have long-term memory. You want to know that long-term memory in all of these categories here. So you want to know long-term memory also has explicit memory and then implicit memory. So things that you explicitly memorize are stuff like declarative memory, which are facts and events. You have events, experience, facts and concepts. Remember, episodic memory contains, can be your events and experience. Semantic memory is facts and concepts. And then implicit memory is procedural memory. So you don't have to, you just unconsciously remember how to ride a bike. So you have some sort of muscle memory that's pretty much implicit, right? So my recommendation is to do practice question and think of examples about which you would categorize what type of memory in, right? So for example, using a knife. Where do you think that is in here? Using a knife. What part of memory is that in? You memorize how to brush your teeth. What memory part is that in? You memorize your birthday. What part of memory is that in? So just do more practice questions too. So memory encoding. Encoding means you put new information in your memory. It could be automatic or effortful. Semantic encoding is stronger than both acoustic and visual encoding. This is important. So semantic means meaning. So anything that has meaning. So if someone told me to memorize the birthday, September 6th, the day September 6th, someone told me that. Like, let's say someone told me 3 days ago, I need to memorize this day, September 6th. Okay, if they just told me that, and there was no meaning behind this day, it wasn't my birthday, it wasn't anything, it wasn't the first day I got my driver's license, it wasn't meaningful at all, this encoding would be very weak. Okay, so it won't enter into it might enter into your short-term memory, especially if you did, I don't know, flashcards a lot. But it won't enter into your long-term memory for why you had to memorize that. So if it has meaning to you, semantic encoding is stronger than both acoustic and visual encoding. Okay, so this is important to know. Sensory and short-term memory. So this is over here. Transient means like short, right? Working memory is also short. So over here, long-term memory. Over here, we already went through all the different categories here. Semantic networks. So semantic networks is basically that you store facts, but they're not just discrete facts. Our brain likes to link concepts together based on meaning, semantics. So your brain's able to create triggers with associated memories to that. And that's how it works when you're writing a test, right? So you remember that this concept related to another different concept. Concept 1 is related to concept 2, and you're linking that to another thing you learned the other day or a story you had, right? So your brain is like a network of different stuff connected. Kind of looks like obsidian, but that's besides the point. All right, retrieval. Recognition of info is stronger than recall. Retrieval is often based on priming interconnected nodes of semantic network. So retrieval means getting this information out. Again, memorize, ask AI if you have any more questions. Basically, diseases, Alzheimer's, degenerative brain disorder linked to loss of acetylcholine causes dementia and memory loss. Korsakoff syndrome, memory loss caused by thiamine deficiency in your brain, causes retrograde amnesia and anterograde amnesia. Another symptom is confabulation, the fabrication but fake memory. So you need to memorize this stuff too. Agnosia, loss of ability to recognize object or sound, usually caused by physical damage to your brain. Interference, retrofractive interference, and proactive interference. So sometimes you can have things that interfere with your memory, your ability to memorize stuff and stuff like that, right? So you might forget old memories because you have new memories, and that's what we call retroactive interference. You might have old memories that interfere with learning your new memories somehow. So somehow, sometimes when you're learning something, you're so fixed in your ways that you can't be open-minded, and that's what we call proactive interference, when your old memories or ways of thinking, right, interfere with learning new memories. Okay. So I'm going to pause there. And I recommend then going to practice and then going into chapter 3 now, or chapter 3 now? Was it chapter 3? I don't know. I don't even think this is organized properly now that I think about it. Learning and memory is down here. We're in chapter 4 now. Dang. Alright, anyways. Yeah. Behavioral sciences 4. I'm not sure if this is necessarily chapter 4, but this is about consciousness, cognition, and language. So your cognition is like your thinking, right? So people have this information processing model, so you have to memorize that. The brain encodes and retrieves stuff like a computer. So it's able to encode, then store, and then retrieve info. Retrieving as in getting stuff from the storage. And then Piaget stages is a theory. So you have sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational. There's lots of YouTube videos about Piaget stages. You can watch a YouTube video to help you with that if you still don't understand, or you can ask AI even more questions if you have them. But basically, Piaget stages, sensory motor, 0 to 2. The child manipulates the environment to meet physical needs through circular reactions. Object permanence, you need to know what object permanence is, develops at the end of this stage. Pre-operational period is around 2 to 7 years old for children, and basically they're developing they should have developed pretend play, symbolic thinking, so they learn to talk. And then egocentrism means like they think everything's about them, and centration. Concrete operation. And if any of these definitions don't make sense, you need to go back and understand them. You have to actually understand them and not just memorize this. Concrete operational is 7 to 11 years old, and it understands, this is where they start to understand that other people have feelings, right? It's not all about them, and their conservation develops. So this has to do with and then math. So this has to do with like conservation. They know that if you have one tube here and another tube there, and one tube is skinnier than the other, but it looks like it has like less water. Like a kid might, have a thin tube of water and have this volume of water, let's say, is 1 liter, right? The kid might pour it into here and say, like, this is so small, it can't be 1 liter. So they don't believe in conservation. But by the time they hit concrete operational period, you should understand that 1 liter here, if I transfer it into this beaker, even though it's wider and it makes it look smaller, like there's less water in it, perceptually, there's still 1 liter, even if I transfer the water over. Okay, and then 11 years old and older, they have formal operational, which is abstract thought and problem solving and moral reasoning. Okay, good. All right, now we're going to go into problem solving. So this is your cognition, right? So problem solving, people might do trial and error. That should be obvious for a lot of people what that means. If you don't, maybe your elementary school teacher maybe failed you at that point. But trial and error is basically you try something and you think you're going to see if it worked. And if it didn't, then you do something else. You try something different. And then if it didn't work, then you keep trying something until something works. And that is trial and error method of problem solving. Then you have algorithms. There should be a definition for it here. I don't know why they didn't put it. But algorithm, there is a definition that you should memorize. Let me see if I can find one. Okay, here. Algorithm is a clear set, step-by-step instruction used to solve a problem, perform a calculation or a specific task. So it's a very step-by-step. How do I get this? I have to do A, B, C to get to D. Okay, so that's an algorithm. Deductive reasoning, form conclusions from rules. Inductive reasoning, form conclusions from evidence. I recommend doing practice problems to help you understand or do more, or figure out more examples for yourself to understand these terms. These two, especially. Mental set, a pattern of approach for a given problem. So you understand that you have to do certain things to fix the problem, and that's your mental set. Functional fixedness is kind of like a mental set, but not really, okay? So it's different. Functional fixedness is a tendency that you use objects in the way it's normally utilized. So that creates a barrier in your problem solving because you're fixed to thinking. For example, a spoon is for a spoon. Okay, what do you think a spoon is for? Feeding people. What else could it be for, though? So that's a functional fixedness that you might have. You might think only a spoon can do a job of a spoon. But what about a fork or whatever else, right? So functional fixedness means you don't just think about the objects how they're normally utilized, but you think a little bit more creatively outside of the box, okay? So if you have functional fixedness, then you're only thinking in a fixed way, okay? Heuristics, rules of thumb. So heuristics, and I don't really like to think of them as rules of thumb. I actually like to think of them as mental shortcuts. But it says here rules of thumb. You can memorize it however way that makes you understand what a heuristic is. And these 3 below here are basically types of heuristics that people have. So one type is availability heuristic. So oftentimes we're going to make decisions based on how easily similar instances can be imagined. Okay? Based on information that we might have available to us that we can imagine happening. So for example, we go into the water and more people have a fear of, for example, the water because they're scared of sharks, because all of a sudden this available heuristic has occurred because people have been watching Jaws, and Jaws is a horror film about this shark attacks and stuff like that. So people are imagining lots of shark attacks even though the probability of having one is very low. All of a sudden this availability heuristic, or this mental shortcut we're making, we're trying to make decisions and trying to say that, oh, it's shark attack is more probable because we've been exposed to shark attacks in the movies and media, whatever, or how easily these circumstances can be imagined, so how easily they are available to us and stuff like that. So we're imagining this and we're making a decision that, oh, shark attacks might happen more, but that's not necessarily the case. Okay, you can be right or wrong with a heuristic, right? But availability heuristic could be a mental shortcut that is not good because you're only including data that is most like basically available to you. Okay, representative heuristic, the tendency to make decisions about action events based on our standard representations of the events. So an example of this that I saw on an Anki card is you have a female that is a model, okay, and let's say you have a male age 40 years old. Okay, so you have a female who is a model around 20 years old, 25 maybe, and then you have a male around 40 years old. So I'm going to say that one of them has a PhD in neuroscience and one of them never got to graduate college. Okay, so who do you think has a PhD in neuroscience? The model at 25 years old or the male at 40 years old? Probably most people are thinking that the male at 40 years old has his PhD in neuroscience and the female never got to graduate college. And that is a representativeness heuristic, the tendency to make decisions about action events based on our standard representations of the events or of the people around it. You know what? You need to go through more examples to understand these too. So make sure you go through lots of examples and practice questions to understand that. Heuristic. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a tendency to focus on information that fits an individual's beliefs while rejecting information that goes against those beliefs. So I took a class in university, and in one of these classes about computers. I love to study a little bit about computers whenever I get time, which I don't really anymore. But when I did, I understood that in the algorithms, in our daily social media algorithms, you are constantly being fed information that fits your beliefs, whether you like it or not. That's how the algorithms work. So we naturally, as human people, have a tendency to focus on information that already fits the belief. So we're liking videos, liking, motivational people that we find inspiring. Think about those influencers that you think are awesome. So you have a tendency to focus whatever values, beliefs you have, and you're liking all these photos, while rejecting information that goes against those beliefs. So you're not really subscribing, for example, to people that you don't agree with, right? You're subscribing and liking to videos that you do agree with. And that's a confirmation bias example of us literally in real time, 2026, using confirmation bias and how algorithms work in the computer. But okay, that's getting a little bit out of scope. Understand what is confirmation bias. Okay. Now we have the Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. So it's just a theory that you have 7 intelligences. Just memorize that. All right. That's all you have to know for that. Let's do consciousness. So consciousness, meaning your alertness. How alert are you in the state of being awake and thinking? So you could be fully fallen asleep, right? And if you're fully fallen asleep, so scientists figured this out with the EEG. So we talked about EEG in like chapter 1, right? That's a way of measuring your brain through electrodes and the electrical signals that are happening in your brain. That's what the EEG is doing. And if the EEG shows beta waves, then you're alert or concentrating. So you have to remember, beta means alert or concentrating. You can use your study tape for that. Look, what is beta? Alert or concentrating. Alpha waves when awake, but tired and eyes closed. So you could do a study tape for that. Beta, high frequency, low amplitude. So if you don't understand waves and how they work, I recommend taking a small class in like physics. But even that, maybe you don't need to, I guess. But frequency and amplitude, you might want to look at some graphs and understand what frequency mean. What does amplitude mean? Frequency, I don't know if you study functions, but I'll give a basic overview of what a sinusoidal wave looks like. And this is the amplitude, your y-axis, right? And your x-axis in this case would be your frequency. I think so, right? So you don't need to do like physics, like actual physics, but you want to understand the basics of what they're saying. Like beta waves have high frequency but low amplitude. What does that mean? So I like to think of it in the graph format, but you might think of it in a different way. I don't know, but EEG always shows up in a graph format anyway. So I recommend learning what that means in terms of x and y axes. All right, alpha means synchronous. All right, sleep. More info on the right. Okay, that means there's more info on this tab over here. Okay, and then hypnosis. Hypnosis, individuals appear to be in normal control. There's like controversy about whether hypnosis is real or not. I've never experienced it. I don't know, but it could be used for all these different things apparently. Meditation is quieting of the mind, used for relief of anxiety. Okay, so next we're gonna go over sleep, since consciousness has a lot to do with sleep. So if you're fully conscious, that means you're awake, right? If you're not very conscious, that means you're sleeping, right? But you're not dead. That's a different story. So sleep, you go through cycles of waves. So we talked about the EEG showing waves. Yeah, you go through beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Those are the 4 different You can use a mnemonic if you want to remember this order, but you have to remember in that order specifically. Beta, alpha, theta, delta. Beta, alpha, theta, delta. And then you want to memorize the stages of sleep. So you want to go through stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you want to memorize exactly what happens in each stage. So stage 1 is sleep, light sleep, theta waves. So you could use your study tape to help you memorize that, right? Theta waves. Stage 2, this is what happens. Stage 3, this is what happens. Stage 2 is slightly deeper, theta waves. Sleep spindles and K complexes. This is important to know. What is a sleep spindle? What is a K complex? Those are actually important, to be honest. And then stage 3 and 4, deep sleep equals delta waves. So D for delta, right? So most of your sleep disorders occur in this stage. Your growth hormone is released. And you have non-rapid eye movement in this phase. Okay, then we're gonna go over rapid eye movement. So REM sleep. So REM sleep is mostly beta waves. So you go through the stages 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2 REM, or 1, 2, 3, 4 REM. So you need to memorize that. And you need to memorize that you do go through a REM stage of sleep. And this REM stage is really, really important. I think this is also, I'm not sure, I think it's this REM sleep part, it doesn't say it here, that actually is useful for memory consolidation. You can search on Google, let me know if that's true or not. Okay, and then we go over circadian rhythm. So your circadian rhythm happens 24 hours in a day. Your body does not, your body's always working. And melatonin is what triggers your sleepiness, and cortisol is what promotes your wakefulness. So you want to memorize basically melatonin and cortisol as antagonists to each other. So they're like opposites. So M is, for your sleepiness, and cortisol is for your awakeness. That's why when you're so stressed all the time or you have so much to do, your body knows I need to be awake, right? So that's a cortisol. Okay, dreaming. Dreaming happens mostly in REM sleep as well. I don't know why it's kind of a little bit like messy, disorganized a little bit. Activation synthesis theory. Yeah. Dreams result from during REM, activation, REM synthesis, and cortex. Okay, so memorize that. Sleep disorders, dysomnia, it's difficult to fall asleep or stay asleep, insomnia, narcolepsy, sleep apnea. You need to memorize exactly what each of these are too, by the way. Parasomnias, abnormal movements or behaviors during sleep, such as night terrors and sleepwalking. Cool. And then we could go into consciousness altering drugs. So some of these drugs are able to alter your consciousness, right? So depressants such as GABA barbiturates, benzodiazepines, they raise your GABA. Amphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy, increase dopamine, increase norepinephrine, serotonin at the synaptic cleft. These are just stuff you kind of have to just memorize, kind of like, I don't know, doing pharmacology, just memorizing names. Opioids and opiates, heroin, morphine, opium, oxycodone, hydrocodone can cause death by respiratory depression. Hallucinogens, LSD, peyote, mescaline, ketamine. Mesolimbic pathway mediates your drug addiction. Includes nucleus accumbens, medial forebrain bundle, and ventral tegmental area. Dopamine is the main neurotransmitter. So the mesolimbic pathway, I think, is also known as your reward pathway. So yeah, study this a little bit more, understand it a little bit more than just mesolimbic pathway. I know it, for me, the way I memorize it is I remember it's a reward pathway. It's not just a pathway related to drug addiction. It's a pathway that can be related to many other things. Okay? Alertness. So you can be different types of alert. You can have selective attention or divided attention. Selective means you're paying attention to only one thing. So for example, your teacher's talking in class. You're only paying attention to the teacher. That's selective attention. Divided attention is when you are trying to multitask. This whole sentence is basically saying that you're trying to multitask. Okay? And then for language, this is my favorite part because this is a part I spent so much of my years studying in school. Language. So in behavioral sciences, you have different you can make language, study different parts about language, right? So you can study the phonology of language, which is the actual sound of speech. I personally don't like the definitions. I don't like when psychologists make definitions for linguists. But basically, phonology is not necessarily the actual sound of speech. That's more like phonetics. Phonology is the sound patterning of speech. How are speech sounds patterned? I don't like this current definition right here, but I don't know. We'll go with the flow. If that's enough for this, I would focus more on understanding than just memorizing these pure definitions, because some of the definitions I don't agree with, right? Not because I don't agree with it, but because this is actually not accurate. Phonology is not the actual sound of speech. I would say that's phonetics, right? Phonology is the speech patterning of speech sounds. Okay, morphology, the building blocks of words. Yeah, that makes sense. Semantics, the meaning of words. Correct. Syntax, rules dictating word order. Yes, that's very correct. Pragmatics, changes in delivery. Good. So memorize these stuff and understand. Understand, not just memorize. Theories of language. Nativist, language acquisition is innate. Learning. Language is controlled by operant conditioning reinforcement. Social interactionist theory. Language is caused by motivation to communicate and interact with others. So out of these theories, the native, there's always two camps. There's a nativist camp and there's a learning behaviorist camp, and they're kind of in argument with each other. You can also be a little bit of both, is fine too, where people believe, nativists believe, specifically Noam Chomsky, but that's a little bit out of scope. You don't have to know who he is. He believed that language acquisition is innate. So we're born with an LAD, which is a language acquisition device. You can watch a Khan Academy video if you're still confused about these theories or something. Just watch a YouTube video and it'll make it more clear. Learning behaviors theory means like that we acquire language as babies due to conditioning or reinforcement. A lot of people don't really believe in this. But it is a theory, and it might show up in this way, so it's good to learn it. Social interactions theory is pretty self-explanatory for that one. Worfian hypothesis, linguistic relativity. The lens by which we view and interpret the world is created by language. So basically, how I learned it in class, the Worfian hypothesis, is, for example, there's this group of indigenous peoples, right? There's this group of people, community of people that only live in the snow. Okay, they only live in the snow. So they have 200 different words for snow, for example. They hypothetically have 200 different words for snow. The language by which we view and interpret the world is how is created by language. So let's say in English, we only have maybe a few words for snow. Snowball, snowflake, snow whatever, and then that's it. But in a different community, they have 200. So what the Wolfram hypothesis is saying is that, language itself can inhibit how we see the world. Right? So we might see snow as just one thing, but this other community that only lives in snow has 200 different terms for snow, will see snow a lot differently. So they interpret the world a lot differently. But I recommend, again, going through a video example or some sort of video that actually explains the Worfian hypothesis than just this. Okay, Broca's and Wernicke's area. I already went through Broca's area and Wernicke's area before, so I won't do it again. Broca's area, again, is in your frontal lobe. Wernicke's in your temporal lobe. Broca is known for producing speech. Wernicke is known for language comprehension. And you can have what you call aphasia. Aphasia is basically, if you studied aphasia, it means that it's a language deficit. But I think of aphasia as more like you have acquired a language deficit. So if you have damage in Broca's area, then you get Broca's aphasia, right? If you have damage in this Wernicke's area of the brain, then you have Wernicke's aphasia. If you have conduction aphasia, that means you can't repeat words. If you have Wernicke's aphasia, you have a lack of comprehension. You still might have word salad. When you produce words, it's good, but like they're not very understandable. Like they're just word salad. You're just saying stuff. Broca's aphasia is a difficulty to generate any speech at all. Okay, so that's basically all of language, which is the cool part. And then after this, you want to go back and do practice questions to test your understanding. Okay, so we left off on behavioral sciences 5, motivation, emotion, and stress. So first we'll tackle motivation. So the point of this chapter is to look at people's motivators, their emotions, why people do the things they do, and the theories that psychology has come up with for motivators. And typically, when we talk about motivation in this case, you could apply it like very broadly, but usually in psychology, the way you want to apply it is more like in a sense of, you think of people as a sense of like almost like in the theory of functionalism is very closely tied as well. I think that the reason why we do things has a function to it. For instance, why do you want food? It has some sort of function to it. You have a motivation to eat food every day, right? Everybody does, but why? So in motivation, it says the purpose of or driving force behind our actions can be extrinsic or intrinsic. That's what you want to remember in this part here. You want to know what intrinsic motivation means and what it means to have extrinsic motivation. These are actual terms to memorize and understand. So extrinsic means your motivation comes from outside of you, not reasons that come from inside of you. So a lot of people say, for example, you don't have to take this teaching as a way to memorize it, but intrinsic motivation is like you yourself told yourself to do something. So you had a pet project, or a lot of CEOs or entrepreneurs are very intrinsically motivated. Nobody told them to do the things they're doing, and yet they're doing it. And then extrinsic motivation, for example, a lot of kids have this. They're always, doing stuff for it because they think others think it's the right thing to do, and that's extrinsic motivation. Okay, now we can move on to instincts. So instincts are innate fixed patterns of behavior in response to stimuli. I think this is easy to understand, but if you don't, just do more Google searches about what instincts are. Instinct theory is that people perform certain behaviors because of their evolutionary program instincts. I hope that one was clear just by reading that. Arousal, the state of being awake and reactive to stimuli. this is basically saying somebody is fully conscious in my mind, but you don't want to kind of mix terms together. So just remember what arousal means, the state of being awake and reactive to things around you, right? Optimal arousal theory. So you want to learn these two together, right? So you want to understand what arousal is, and then you want to understand what optimal arousal theory is. So the optimal arousal theory is basically the optimal performance requires optimal arousal. So what it means here is that your optimal performance, let's say you have a chart here, a percentile chart or something like that. So you have an optimal performance at this peak. Whoops. So you have optimal performance, let's say at this peak here, and this is basically saying that, you know, I had this class in psychology as well. I took psychology, of course, and basically how I learned it is more than just a graph. I learned it in a way in a way related to stress, actually. So I learned arousal in a way related to stress when I was taking psychology. So the best analogy I can give, or like an example I can give, is that let's say you live your life too stressed. So do you really get anything done at this high level? Some people might not, but it's not good for your survival as an organism, right? And then as another way to live is low stress, right? So you're living with low stress. And you may be thinking why we're talking about stress when it's optimal arousal theories, because if you want optimal optimal performance, then you need optimal arousal. So you'll be in moderate stress, for example. And no, arousal doesn't mean stress. That's not what we're saying. But the point is, the stress also has to do with being awake, right? You remember that when you're stressed, you have a hormone called cortisol, and cortisol is not just some stress hormone. We just call it a stress hormone. No, cortisol does have impact on your body, and it increases and also regulates, blood glucose and stuff like that. So like if you saw anything that leads you into big distress, and then let's say a fight or flight response, and your epinephrine, norepinephrine go up through the roof, then your glucose in your body will start to go mad, and you're going to have all this energy and blood flow. What is the blood flow for biologically? It's for you to be able to respond to that stressors, for example, because your body thinks you're going to run from a tiger. Literally, it doesn't know the difference, honestly, because we're not very much evoluted as we might think. All right, our drives. So our drives are internal states of tension that beget, I don't know if this is a typo, that beget particular behaviors focused on goals. So what drives are their internal states of tension that basically cause you to have a particular behavior. Some drives are called primary drives, and some drives are called secondary drives. So if you have a primary drive, then it's biological. So an example of primary drive that causes tension is hunger. So your hunger is not a mood that people want. So then what happens is it drives you toward this particular behavior. What biological particular behavior is that? It's eating, right? So like that's a primary drive. Secondary drives stem from learning. So I think of secondary drives as anything that isn't biological, basically. Okay, so just go and Google, find more examples for yourself, do more practice questions related to drives. All right, drive reduction theory. So drive reduction theory is a motivation arises from the desire to eliminate drives which create uncomfortable internal states. So you want to learn drives and drive reduction theory together, these two. Okay, and then you want to learn optimal arousal theory and arousal together. And you want to learn instinct theory with instincts together, like this. Okay, that's how you kind of want to learn them. Okay, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This one is infamous in every single psychology textbook I've ever read in my entire life. Physiological, safety, so blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff will not make sense unless you actually understand what this theory is. Here is a triangle. You need to look at this triangle. Search it up more on Google if you still don't get it. But I'll find a better picture right now. Maslow's needs. Alright, so here's a good picture. This one's better because it has the subtitles for everyone to see. Your base is your physiological needs. So Maslow came up with this. So here's the triangle, right? And so the bottom of the base of the triangle is your physiological, right? This is your physiological, and then next is your safety. So safety involves personal security, employment, resources, health, and property. And then the next is love and belonging. So relationships, essentially. Esteem is next. So you have your self-respect, self-esteem, anything, strength and freedom. And then self-actualization is the desire to become the most one can be. So this is a good picture of this man climbing up this Maslow hierarchy of needs. All right. So higher needs only produce drives once lower needs are met. So that's part of the theory, that if you meet the physiological needs, okay, we can go on to safety. Okay, you have a nice home and you're safe. All right, we can move on to friendships, and then we can move on to your esteem, and then self-actualization, where you become your real self. That's the whole idea. So this self-actualization is part of Maslow's. Self-determination theory emphasizes 3 universal needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Self-determination theory. Okay, so here's self-determination theory. Competence needs to be effective in dealing with the environment. 2, autonomy, need to control the direction of their own lives. 3, relatedness, need to have close affectionate relationship with others. So very similar to Maslow's, but it has less steps, if that makes sense. There's only 3 needs. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I see, has 5 to remember here, right? Okay, incentive theory explains motivation as a desire to pursue rewards and avoid punishments. So incentive theory is basically saying, when somebody has an incentive for you to do, right? Someone gives you an incentive. It's basically like trying to give someone a reward in order to do something. So incentive theory is basically that in terms of motivation theory, So try to find some examples for yourself to see how that can make sense for you if you haven't actively processed that yet. Expectancy value theory. The amount of motivation for a task is based on the expectation of success and the value of that success. So expectancy value theory. I know we learned all this in school. They made us learn this in the fastest time ever. Okay, expectancy value theory states that human motivation and behavior are driven by 2 main factors: expectancy for success and the subjective value of that success. So if you guys want to learn how to get examples, you can now ask your Google AIs to give you examples very quickly. This is how you can learn to learn, right? The very basics, if you haven't already learned to learn in school, which I hope you have. So this is the scenario. Imagine you want to learn advanced video editing software to transform long videos into short. Your motivation to complete this goal depends entirely on how you balance your expectations and your perceived value of the project. So expectancy means, can you do it, right? So high expectancy means you have basic computer skills and access to a lot of stuff, and you understand everything, and you have hours of practice of video editing, for example. Low expectancy is when everything looks so hard. So your perceived value of the project is that it's really difficult. So what does that have to do with your motivation? So what does high expectancy, have to do with motivation? It gives you high motivation, right? If you have low expectancy or zero expectancy, like, oh, this will never turn out good, or the value of this is near to zero, then your motivation is going to be low, right? So another example I could give is with an athlete and their competition. So you have an athlete that's training for a competition, and the athlete wants to do well. Both of them want to do well. Internally, they have some intrinsic motivation in a way. But in the expectancy value theory, one of the athletes looks around and says, wow, everyone is 5 seconds faster and they only have 1 week to train, and it's going to be impossible to do. So expectancy is low. So that means what? Their motivation to win will be low, according to expectancy value theory. Okay, and then you can have the other athlete that has high expectancy. So they are getting, their practice trial times are under 0.2 seconds faster than any other person in their cohort. So what do you think that amounts to? They have amounted to high motivation in this theory specifically. Okay, let's move on to opponent process theory. So opponent process theory explains motivation for drug use. As drug increases, the body counteracts its effects, leading to tolerance and uncomfortable withdrawal systems. You should understand the definitions for tolerance and withdrawal as well, by the way. Okay. Right, let's explain opponent's process theory. So in the test, there's a physiological color perception theory for opponent process theory. This is not the one that we're talking about in behavioral sciences. So I'm going to go, you need to go, when you go on Google, make sure you type in, why is it not showing up? So there's not that many good images that I have for opponent process theory. There's also on Reddit people that have explained it. This person probably explained it well, so I'm going to read over it, okay? So this is from a fellow community member. So I actually understand this terms of motivation, not light. That would be awesome if you could explain the light portion. But opponent process theory for motivation. So they're talking about the optics thing. So there's another opponent process theory related to light and optics. But there's one for motivation that we're going over right now. And yes, it's often used when speaking of addictive behaviors. Certain emotional states are followed by another emotional state that is opposite of the first. As time goes on, the second emotional state becomes stronger than the first. For example, look at smoking. Let's say you just started to smoke. Feeling high is a first emotional state, so feeling good. And then you get withdrawal, which is the second one, and that's the opposite one. So here, the high feels very strong, but the withdrawal is not strong. So when the person smokes, the high is really the takeaway. And I wouldn't say strong or not strong. They could both be strong. I would edit this user's response a little bit and say that both of these processes, these opposite emotional states, for instance, can be very strong. But the difference is that they're obviously opposing. That's why we call opponent process theory. So when the person smokes, the high is really the main takeaway of what they're getting out of it. And the withdrawal is weak, but is present. So they're really getting hooked on the drug because of that. and 1 year later the withdrawal is overriding and hence the opponent process prevails. So I hope that person's example kind of helped give a better definition. Okay, next thing is house money effect. What is the house money effect? The house money effect is after a prior gain, people become more open to assuming risk since the new money is not treated as their own. So let's say you went to gamble or something like that, right? And you won a lot of new money. People are willing to take more risks because in their head and in their mind, cognitively, they're thinking like, this money is not actually my own. So this is basically, you can give yourself a lot more examples. There's probably a lot more better examples. But yeah, gambler's fallacy. If something happens more frequently than normal, it will happen less frequently in the future or vice versa. So this is a fallacy, meaning this is something people believe, but it's not necessarily true, right? Let me go to gambler's fallacy. If a person flips a coin and it lands on heads 5 times in a row, a person who falls into gambler's fallacy trap may believe that the next flip is likely to result in tails. So for example, you're flipping a coin, right? And you're always getting heads. And then this causes you to have a gambler's fallacy, a type of belief that's kind of not true, right? It kind of makes you believe that the next event, right, this next event is not going to be heads again. It's going to be tails. That's what gambler's fallacy is thinking. So you flip heads, let's say 5 times in a row, a person falls into gambler's fallacy trap because they think the next flip will be the opposite, right? But the truth in reality is that the probability, so I flip heads, then the truth is that the truth is that it's always 50-50 on a coin flip or whatever science you want to give to it, 49-51 or whatever. But it's basically a 50-50 probability, heads or tails. But a gambler's fallacy is that they believe, oh, I flip heads 4 times. That means it has to be tails. But that's not necessarily true, right? Because you know that every coin flip on its own, individual coin flip, is actually a 50-50 probability. So that's why we call it a gambler's fallacy. All right. Now we're on prisoner's dilemma. 2 people act out of their own self-interest, but if they had cooperated, the result would have been even better. So this is like, we call it prisoner's dilemma. They probably found it with prisoners themselves or something like that. But basically, let's say you had 2 prisoners, and you told one prisoner, you can have a freedom in 2 years if you do 200 hours of community service. And then you had a prisoner B, and you told them you could be free with also the same amount. Okay, so that's their deal. They both have the same deal of about, 200 hours of community service to become free. Okay, now the prisoner's dilemma comes from here. So 2 people are acting on their own self-interest. So they have other offers. So let's say their other offer was that they could also cooperate and they will have 1 year free. But they have to cooperate with another prisoner member to get those hours. Now, in our everyday world, it makes sense. But in a prisoner's dilemma, this is what happens. People act out of their own self-interest, even if the result would have been better if they cooperated. Let me show you. All right. It's a paradox in decision analysis in which 2 individuals acting in their own self-interest does not produce the optimal outcome. So prisoner A, they could confess, get 5 years. Prisoner B could confess, get 5 years. Prisoner A can get 0 years and confess, and prisoner B could remain silent but get 20 years. If both of them will remain silent together, they'll get 1 year, 1 year. And so that reduces the amount they have to stay in prison, both of them, only 1 year, right? This is a very good picture, by the way. And it puts a prisoner's theory in game theory, this Britannica encyclopedia. And so here, prisoner A, prisoner B confesses, they get a go, freedom. But the prisoner A has to stay in for 20 years. But if only they work together, right, they would have had only maximum 1 year over here. Okay. So let's see, emotion or stress. Let's go for stress first on the top right of this page over here. So what is stress? Stress is the physiological and cognitive response to challenges or life changes. So what does that mean? I know a lot of people will read definitions. When I was studying for universities, courses and stuff, there'll be a lot of complicated definitions. If you ever meet yourself with one, you want to make sure you focus on understanding what is happening rather than just memorizing the definitions cold. Okay, moving on from that tip. Stress is the physiological and cognitive response to any challenges or life changes. So stress can actually be any response to a life change. Stress can actually be good, and stress can also be bad in a way to your body. So that's why down here it says distress and eustress. So stressors are anything that leads to a stress response and can lead to distress or eustress. You should know what is distress and what is eustress. Eustress is a more positive form of stress. Distress is a more negative form of stress. What does it mean to be positive or negative, right? Because those words can be quite confusing the way scientists like to use it, because sometimes they're like saying positive in a way that means more like in a mathematical way of adding quantity. That's not what we mean here. Eustress is actually positive for someone, like it's growing them. Like the stress that's being put on them is growing them. For example, exercise. Distress is making someone just feel horrible, feel they're just, you know, everything's going downhill from there. That's usually what we think of, usually when we think of stress in general for most people. But yes, there can be two different types, right? Okay, stress appraisal. So you can have primary appraisal or secondary appraisal. So primary appraisal says that is when classifying a potential stressor as irrelevant, benign, positive, or stressful. Secondary appraisal is evaluating if the organism can cope with the stress. So this is a theory, by the way. So stress appraisal is just a theory. I don't know if it's by Lazarus. I'm going to search it up right now. Sorry, guys. I'm not the best teacher here. Yeah, so it is by Lazarus. I don't know why I remember his name. I don't think you have to memorize his name at all. So yeah, you have your environment, you have your perceptual filter, the person, and then there's primary and secondary appraisal right here. So primary is your interpretation of those stressors. So interpretation as in, oh, the stress is a dangerous threat, or this stress is irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. Most of the time when like little instances in my life come across, I usually just tell myself and I interpret stressors overtly. Like I'll say, yeah, this is a positive type of stress. For example, I'm exercising and I'm running a marathon, or I'm doing a 10-kilometer run or 5-kilometer run, or I'm going to the gym for 30 minutes. This is a interpretation of this stressor in my mind. So the primary appraisal that I have is it's positive. Okay, if I have instead a zombie attacking me, okay, so I'm going to interpret that stressor as dangerous. And then another way to interpret stressors is irrelevant. So I do this often when I have little stuff that's bothering me, or I have little things that come up in my life. I denote those things as irrelevant. Why? Why would you want to denote some things as positive and irrelevant in your life when you're appraising, you're going through primary appraisal and you're interpreting your own stressors? Why? Because if you interpret anything as positive, or even if the stressor to you is irrelevant, even let's say people are stressed about food. In my mind, we're in a very rich country. We have access. If you're watching this, you have access to internet, and that is a very privileged position. So, to my mind, interpreting, food. A lot of people think about food all the time. Is to me, and I usually interpret as an irrelevant stressor. But why could that be possibly a good thing for you? Why can interpretation of stressors in a positive or irrelevant way be good? It's because it will not go into secondary appraisal, where your body's going to start using resources. So the only time, according to this theory, that your body starts using lots of resources is when it interprets the stress as dangerous, challenging, threatful, harmful. So let's say you saw a tiger, right? Your primary appraisal of that stress is that it's very dangerous. Your secondary appraisal is that you need to use your body's resources, increase your stress hormone, increase your blood flow, increase everything, right, to respond to that stress. So secondary appraisal, body's starting to use resources. There's also more to the theory, but we don't have to go through that. All right, general adaptation syndrome. This is another stress theory. This is better learned through the graph. I don't know why the graph is not on here, but my recommendation again is to go on Google Images and look at a picture of general adaptation syndrome. So this is Cillier's general adaptation syndrome. Here is the very baseline of where you start. You're in good health, otherwise known as homeostasis. So you're in a balanced, very calm, normal position. Not necessarily calm, but just normal, right? Your body. In terms of, you want to think of this theory in terms of your body's resources. You also want to think of stress and behavioral sciences, looking at stress as in terms of your body's resources. So in this graph, here your body's resources at homeostasis. It's normal, good health. And then here, you start to meet a challenge, a stressor. This is your alarm stage. The alarm stage is where you realize, oh, your body figures out that there's a stress. It's then sending out an alarm, and then now it's increasing its resistance. So you get the resistance stage. That's the resistance stage here, and then you get exhaustion. This is exhaustion stage. So what happens in each stage? So this person wrote it out really well. Your body reacts to the stress, and your sympathetic nervous system fires. So this is basically your sympathetic nervous system, right? It's firing up. And then resistance is adaptation to that stress, sustained release of cortisol in attempt. So this is your sustained release of cortisol, and then exhaustion. So all your body's resources at some point will become exhausted. So you no longer can deal with that stress. And so at exhaustion phase, I like this graph, it looks cool. You're actually, you can't actually do much, if that makes sense. So exhaustion phase is like your body's so tired that you're basically, I call it the burnout stage, but you can call it whatever you want. In this theory, it's just called exhaustion, right? Okay. So these both involve sympathetic nervous system and endocrine system. So that's something that wasn't talked about before. Not only are you having a fight or flight response, basically, with the sympathetic nervous system firing, but you're also enabling your endocrine system, which is a release of acetylcholine, which leads to an increase of cortisol. You need to memorize that. All right, so now we're on emotion. So there are 3 theories of emotion. This picture summarizes it pretty well. So once you read through the 3 theories, read through these example diagrams here, and this will make it more clear. So emotion, what is it? It's a state of mind or feeling that is subjectively experienced based on circumstances, mood, and relationships. So subjectively experienced, and it's a state of mind or feeling. Okay, and the 3 components of emotion involve cognitive, physiological, and behavioral. So cognitive is subjective, it's what you're thinking pretty much. Changes in autonomic nervous system is physiological. So literally what is happening to your body. What is happening to your body is physiological. Behavioral means what is happening to your facial expressions and body language. I know it can sound confusing, but think of between physiological and behavioral, because they're both involving your body technically. But just think of physiological as any changes more so deeper within you, like your hormones, things, you don't, yeah. And then behavioral, think of it more on the outside. So your body language and facial expressions change with your emotions, right? That's why great actors know how to deal with all of this, But more specifically, good actors would know behavioral because it's all on the outside, basically, right? Okay, 7 universal emotions was found by a researcher. I forgot his name, to be honest. I'm not sure if you have to know his name. I don't think it's that important as knowing what the 7 universal emotions are. They're happiness, sadness, contempt, surprise, fear, disgust, and anger. Contempt is kind of like, you, I don't really like you kind of thing. I'm pretty sure that's contempt. Contempt. This is the face of contempt, everybody. Okay, James Lange theory, Cannon-Barr theory, and Scatter-Singer theory. So you want to learn these 3 theories of emotion all together. That's how it shows up in the textbook, and that's probably the best way to make connections and links. And it's even in this diagram on the right, so it can help you memorize what's happening, right? So James Lange theory is behavioral and physiological actions lead to emotions. So the theory is basically, if I behave in a certain way, that makes me feel a certain way. So if I decide I want to start, so the example given here is power posing. So if I wanted to start power posing, meaning I take very confident strides in my life, I literally do that. Like I literally pose like Superman, or I have my arms stretched wide, or my body language in general is just very confident, right? So that's my behavior and physiological actions. I'm not too sure if that involves physiological, but it leads to an emotion. What emotion do you think I have from that, doing power posing, just power posing, right? Probably, confidence, and emotions that are subjective too, like happiness. So basically, here is an example over here. You see a snake, your heart starts pounding and you start sweating, and that's when you feel the emotion. So that's James Lange theory. I recommend memorizing what each theory is, and then like trying to memorize or write down on a whiteboard, whether you use a digital one nowadays, 2026, a lot of people use digital ones, or you have a real whiteboard to write things down, or even a pen and paper, but if you're studying this much, you probably want a whiteboard just to reduce your paper load. But you take a whiteboard and you write down the examples. You write down the examples and you see if you're right, if you're more accurate in your explanation, right? So in the Cannon-Barr theory, you have emotional and physiological responses to a stimulus occur simultaneously. So let's say you saw the snake, but this time the physiological and the emotion happen at the same time. By the way, the power posing is not like a really good example if you just write power posing. I don't know why it's there, to be honest. I think the snake example is really good. So just ignore the power posing, honestly. Just, you know what, you can figure out a good example with it, sure. But the snake idea and the way it shows you the difference between the theories is a good way to learn, okay? Scatter-Singer theory, also known as two-factor theory of emotion, also known as two-factor theory of emotion, is when you get them two together, you have a cognitive label. So the difference between, Cannon-Barr and Scatter-Singer, or two-factor theory, also known as two-factor theory, is that Scatter-Singer has another thing called a cognitive label that someone has applied to their physiological response, and that leads to the cumulative emotion. Okay, and your limbic system has a lot to do. Remember, your limbic system is part of your brain, right? And remember, we did a little bit of the limbic system early in the behavioral sciences chapters. Yeah, so that's coming back again, but it's coming back for emotion, right? And so it is also concerned with your instincts and mood. So you want to know where the limbic system is in your brain. So what component parts of the brain make up the limbic system? What is the limbic system comprised of, right? And you want to know the different parts of the limbic system and their functions. But we already went over that early on. So yeah, we don't have to go through that again. Okay, now we're on Behavioral Sciences 6, and this has to do with identity and personality. Okay, so we're halfway there, and by halfway, I think you should probably do practice questions now. So if you do a textbook style and you go to Psychology, you will find probably the one we're looking for, motivation and emotion. So you want to just click Start Practice, and as a beginner, you want to set your settings to discrete, foundational, and 5 questions, and then you want to save the preset, and then generate your practice questions. Whichever way you find your practice questions is fine. but you need to practice, right? So I'll just give one example of the practice questions for this set. Hopefully it generates good. All right, so here are some practice questions that I'll just give for free. So you could just pause and screenshot them and try to work through them. So this is one example. In a classical psychological experiment, subjects are injected with epinephrine to induce physiological arousal. When placed in a room with joyful confederate, subjects label their feeling as happiness. When placed with an angry confederate, subjects label their feeling as anger. Which emotion is best supported by these? Which theory of emotion is best supported by these feelings? So it's asking you about a theory of emotion, right? So Lazarus theory, by the way, like I showed you guys, is not part of this, because this is about, remember, first primary appraisal and secondary appraisal. It's not a theory of emotion, so you can strike that out. And then you want to work through the practice question and figure out which theory of emotion it could be. So, and then you want to move on from that. And then you want to do the next question. You could just screenshot this. I'm going to give these for free. Do them right now, right? Next question. Next question. And then once you're done, it will say end block, and you can end the block. You can also full screen it for like more focus. And the reason why you only see these questions and not big passages, and why I recommend people do discrete questions and not passage-like questions. So if you go in your settings, you can also do long passages, which are more like your traditional exam style. I recommend not doing that as a beginner. As a beginner, it's gonna be too long for you to study that way. All right, so you want to go through about a midterm full of practice questions. If you're a pen and paper type of person, then gather your practice questions all into one Word doc or Google Doc or whatever word processor that you use. Print them out for yourself. If you're a pen and paper type of person, print them out for yourself and do yourself good by testing your own self-knowledge and doing the midterm. Okay, so now we're on the self-concept identity. What is the self-concept and identity? Self-concept is the sum of ways that we describe ourselves. Identities are individual components of our self-concept, related to the group to which we belong. Self-esteem, so think about examples that could be the case for this, or just do practice questions to help you figure out what examples there are for this. Self-esteem, the closer our actual self is to our ideal self and ought self. So our actual self is literally who we are in reality. Ideal self is who we want ourselves to be, and our ought self is who others want us to be. And so I'm not too sure what it's saying here to increase our self-esteem. The note here isn't that great, to be honest. You can always Google that, but I don't think that's that important, right? Let me see what else we have here. Self-efficacy is the degree to which we see ourselves as being capable at a given skill or situation, so that's easy to learn. Learned helplessness is a state of hopelessness that results from being unable to avoid repeated negative stimuli. So learned helplessness is just a complicated way of kind of saying giving up, right? So I'm going to show a better example. Learned helplessness. So in university, when we learn helplessness, it's basically like you have this dog, and this dog is basically, it has given up. And the reason why it's given up is because it's realized that, no matter how much effort I put in, this is not going to work out. That's why it's given up. So it has learned helplessness. So it's a state of hopelessness that results from being unable to avoid negative stimuli. So this dog knows that no matter what, it's always going to get shocked. Unfortunately, I don't think you're allowed to do this experiment anymore. This dog is, given up. So that learned helpless to me is like giving up. Locus of control. Locus of control, it can be internal or external. So if you have an internal locus of control, so locus of control is kind of like a spectrum. Some people can have more internal locus of control than others, and some people can have more external locus of control than others. So an internal locus of control is where we believe we control our own success and failure. An external locus of control is when we believe that outside factors have more control to what happens to our lives. I don't want to get too in-depth with it, but think about examples in your own life, and also think about these definitions and how they apply. So my question to you is, do you believe you have a greater internal or external locus of control? To me, I believe there is actually 50-50. I believe that, your actions can make a big impact on your own success and failure, yes. But I also believe that externally, everyone is given kind of a play of cards by a draw of luck, right? So in my theory of life, I've come up with a locus of control that's about 50-50, to be honest. So externally, you can't control how much competition you have, but you can pick the industry that you chose to be in, right? So it's both internal and external. You cannot control the population that you're competing with, but you do have a decision on the industry that you want to compete in. So everyone has a different locus of control, but basically, just know the definition. Then we can go on to it's probably better to go on to formation of identity. These are really high yield. This is very important to memorize. The theories in this one, yeah, okay, they are. So Freud, remember we talked about Freud, that he was all the way in chapter 1, and the only thing we remember, or you probably got away as a beginner learner, learning behavioral sciences for the first time in your life, you'll just remember psychoanalytic. analytic. And like I told you in the very first chapter, all you have to remember Freud and psychoanalytic. Freud and psychoanalytic. Okay, Freud and psychoanalytic. And Freud came up with this theory of identity, where people go through psychosocial stages of personality development based on tensions caused by their libido. Failure at any stage leads to fixation, which causes a personality disorder. So you want to know the terms libido. Oops. So you want to know these terms libido, and you want to know the terms fixation. And then you want to memorize these stages here. So you want to memorize 0 to 1. This is ages, by the way. 0 to 1 years old is oral stage. 1 to 3 is anal stage. 3 to 6 is phallic stage. 6 to latent. They're actually, I recommend looking at a picture figure. So Freud. So go online and find a picture like this. Actually, this doesn't explain it well. Go online and find a picture like this. And it will talk more about the theory. And you want to memorize that the oral is 0 to 1, and the erogenous zone is the mouth. So 0 to 1, what it means is at a young age, the babies are exploring. What are they exploring with? What do babies usually do? They put everything in their mouths. So that's the oral stage, right? And then, so this is also just a theory. So remember that it's not like 100% practical, but he came up with this, and it's a big, it was a big thing in behavioral sciences. So this is why we learn it, right? And then anal, 1 to 3, bowels plus bladder. So kids are learning now to use the washroom, right? So this is a picture of that. And then phallic stage, where is that? Phallic stage, erogenous zone is the genitals, right? Latency is none. It's focused on social skills and hobbies. And the last one is also that one. So just read up about each stage as well and kind of understand the broader scope of the stage. So here, I'll just pause here. This is a good example of a chart to memorize, right? More than memorize, you want to just understand a basic idea of what's happening between each stages, right? And then is Erikson's theory. Erikson's theory, stages stem from conflicts throughout life. So these are the stages, and just type them in. So these are the stages, and then this is a better kind of picture. And so read through each stage, and then their description of what's happening in each stage too. That will help you. You want to memorize, for example, stage 3 is initiative versus guilt. You don't have to remember this preschool, middle school, teenage years. You just need to know the stage number, the years of age, and also this up here. So industry versus inferiority. That happens, those conflict between industry and inferiority happens at stage 4, 6 to 11 years. For example, someone says someone's going through generativity versus stagnation. You want to memorize that generativity versus stagnation are conflicting with each other at this stage 7. And at stage 7, someone is 40 to 65 years old. An example for generativity and stagnation, if you go to this one, it says adults create or nurture things that will outlast them, contributing to society. So they kind of go through the conflict of whether they want to generate more stuff that contributes to society, or stagnate, meaning they're not really doing that much else at this point to try to generate more to the society, right? So read through the descriptions per each one. You don't have to really memorize the basic virtue, but if it helps you kind of get a bigger, broader idea and helps you memorize stuff, that's good. Okay. So yeah, remember the ages, and most importantly, these conflicts here. These are the conflicts. Okay, and then you have Kohlberg's theory, which is a theory based on moral dilemmas. Kohlberg. So here are Kohlberg's stages of moral development. So you have your pre-conventional, conventional, and then post-conventional. This one is a lot here. Probably wouldn't do that. Here, this is a good picture where the pre-conventional level is where people are trying to avoid punishment and aim at rewards. Then you have conventional level, and then you have post-conventional level. So this is a good picture here. So you could kind of learn from this one. Viscosity, zone of proximal development. The skills that a child has not yet mastered and require a more knowledgeable other to accomplish. Okay, so basically viscosity stages of development. So in the Lev's viscosity zone of proximal development, basically saying that you have the zone of development, but to be able to, this is your zone, what I can do with help, and what a child cannot do at all. So zone of ZPD is your zone of proximal development, right? This is what you could do if you had help from someone else. Here, if you had more knowledgeable others or technology and tools, and then beyond my reach. So right now, I actually do some speech therapy for kids, right? And so this applies to kids because kids have a certain amount of area that they can learn on their own. And I'm just giving this example from my real life experience. And this is the area in which they could, for example, it's speech therapy, speak on their own, right? This is how much they could do 5 words on their own. All right, but if I teach the kid and I model to them new words, I show them new words and I show them how to use the words, and I model to them how I want them to use the words, right? That's me as a knowledgeable others, okay? And I might be, for example, using technology as well. So maybe the kids, need technology. So I'm showing them on a technology device or something like that. And so this is now the skill set. Now I have increased their skill set by 5 more words by being a knowledgeable other and showing them. So this is now their zone of proximal development. What I can learn with help. So what can the learner who is learning, what can they learn with help, right? And this is the same thing what happens when you learn any skill, really. It doesn't matter if it's language, right? Something as it doesn't matter if it's language, it doesn't matter if it's music, for instance, it doesn't matter if you're studying something. Usually you are going to learn better if you have a more knowledgeable other on your side, right? So it doesn't hurt to have a mentor, is what I'm saying, and a good mentor. It doesn't hurt to have a teacher and a good teacher, is what I'm saying. And this is the theory, right? That there's only a certain set of skills that you can do by yourself, but if you want to be in the zone of proximal development, then you will need to acquire knowledgeable others that can help teach you, or technology and tools. And then that will increase the level at which you already know something, right? That will increase your skill set. Okay. Imitation and role taking, common ways children learn from each other. So it's just saying that children learn commonly by imitating and role taking. So they just imitate things. They just imitate, copy what they see around them. Also, this image looks scary in dark mode. The image looks better here for Kohlberg's role stages. So again, Kohlberg, we already talked about Kohlberg, but there's a picture here that I just saw that you could read right after you know Kohlberg. So this is Kohlberg's stages of development. That's what the picture here is for. Okay. Reference group is the group to which we compare ourselves. So that's an easy definition for everyone. That's a reference group. Okay, now let's go into personality. So personality has to do with Freud as well. Remember I said psychoanalytic? Yeah. So there are many other psychologists back then that also had a psychoanalytic perspective, which is that personality results from your unconscious urges and desires. So these are a few of the researchers. They're not too important to remember. Just be aware of them, recognize them a little bit. Freud's theory is the id, superego, and ego. So your id, it bases your urges of survival and reproduction. And then superego is the idealist and perfectionist, and the mediator between the two, and the conscious mind is your ego. So you can think of it as one of them's the devil on your shoulder. If you ever watch a movie like that, like Wizards of Waverly Place, and they're like talking to the devil on their shoulder, they're talking to the angel on their shoulder. If this example, by the way, makes no sense, you can find another example that makes sense to you. But your id is like telling you like, I want to do this right away. Instant gratification, right? It's not really thinking long term for you. It's just thinking about what's best for you in the moment. Like, oh, this is gonna feel great. I'm gonna do that. That's your id. Your super ego is the one that's an idealist, is a perfectionist. In other words, it's something that's like the angel on your shoulder, right? So your angel on your shoulder is saying, no, we can't do this now because we should do it later. We should not watch 3 episodes on Netflix. We should study for 60 minutes and then watch an hour on Netflix. And then that will be an ideal day, for example. So your super ego is telling you that, right? Your ego is a mediator between the two and is saying that, all right, let's try to balance this. So let's do an idea where we do half the day of Netflix and half the day of study, and that's a good day. So it's mediating that, and it's your conscious mind. Remember that, it's your conscious. And the ego uses defense mechanisms in order to reduce stress. So defense mechanisms is very important. I don't know why they didn't list the defense mechanisms here, but you have to know them. And it lowers your stress. Okay, so defense mechanism. I'm kind of surprised that this review sheet, yes, it's high yield, but there's a lot of stuff as a beginner, if you haven't learned in the textbook, will be very confusing. So these are here some of the defense mechanisms you should know. For that. Let's see if anybody's listed them out. So yeah, this is a defense mechanism list that you should know and memorize, basically. So or watch this Khan Academy video about defense mechanisms. Yeah, so defense mechanisms is very important. I'm gonna circle that and talk about it. Circle. Let's see if I could use one that isn't by you, Earth, because I will get probably copyright. I don't know. That was just a Reddit post someone was posting. But you should know, for example, what is repression? Repression is when you unconsciously remove an idea or feeling from your conscious in order to make something feel better and lower your stress, right? So that's just an example of one of the defense mechanisms, but you should know all of them, right? Okay, all 3 operate at least in part in the unconscious. So all 3 of it's saying your id, superego, and ego are at least in part in your unconscious. So the ego, yes, it's dealing with your conscious mind, but it's also part of your unconscious too. Okay, Jung, it's not Jung, I don't think, or I think people say Jung. Collective unconscious links all humans together. Personality is influenced by archetypes. So you need to know what an archetype is. Archetype. Jung theory. I'm gonna try to teach it better, but I don't know. Alright, so these are some archetype examples. Whoops. So archetypes are like almost like an ideal of what we see, and we kind of fit ourselves into certain archetypes, right? certain type of person. So personality is influenced by archetypes. Adler and Horney, unconscious is motivated by social urges. Your unconscious is motivated by social urges. So, if you've ever heard of peer pressure or whatever, yeah. Humanistic perspective emphasizes the internal feeling of healthy individuals as they strive for happiness and self-realization. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as well as Rogers' unconditional positive regard, right? They are both part of humanistic personality. So the one we just saw up here is part of the humanistic perspective. So how I like to view psychology is, and how I recommend you kind of look at psychology is like, you have a bunch of researchers, right? There's Ford, there's Erickson, there's Rogers, there's Maslow. These are researchers. These are literally their last names, I think, right? Or possibly their middle names. And they all have a perspective, right? People in the psychoanalytic perspective include Freud, Jung, Adler, Hardy, right? They have these perspectives, and then they go through them at the bottom here, right? And then, whoops, not all the way there. They go through them here, from here to here, right? This is all psychoanalytic. Then the next perspective is humanistic. It doesn't gain quite as big because it's not as probably high yield, right? But Maslow is important to remember, and also Rogers' unconditional positive regard. So what is that? So in Rogers' unconditional positive regard is letting a person know that they are accepted and valued no matter what. It's basically unconditional love. Okay. Type and trait theory is personality can be described by identifiable facts that carry certain behaviors. So these are some examples of type theories. Ancient Greek humors, Sheldon's somatotypes, divisions into type A and type B, Myers-Briggs type inventory. I don't think it's that important to it is not that important to memorize like all of them, but you kind of want to have an idea of them, right? So ancient Greek humors. Let's see, psychology. So here, ancient Greek humoral psychology pioneered by Hippocrates, expanded by Galen, theorized that human personality, behavior, and physical health are driven by 4 bodily fluids. Sheldon somatotypes. You can just search these up really quickly and you'll understand. Type A and Type B personality. So Type A is basically a person that, is almost like your CEO person that's always, driven to do stuff and whatnot. They're always doing stuff just because, they like to climb the mountain. Type B is the more relaxed, low stress type of person, and they've kind of divided people into Type A and Type B in this type theory specifically. There's also a Myers-Briggs type theory. This is my favorite picture of a Type A versus Type B person, right? It's an example. All right, and then you have trait theories, right? So PEN stands for psychotism, extroversion, and neuroticism. So if you ever listen to, what's his name, Jordan Peterson, something like that, the psychology professor talk, he actually talks about this a lot in his random videos. Psychotism, nonconformity, extroversion means you're sociable, right? People say all the time, are you extroverted, introverted? Yeah, that's that, basically. Neuroticism, arousal in stressful situations. So if you're highly neurotic, you have a lot of stress in stressful situations, right? Big Five. So Big Five personalities. I think Jordan Peterson talks about that a lot. So yeah, if you ever listen to him, he's always talking about openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. You want to use a mnemonic that can help you, and one mnemonic that might help is called Ocean Mnemonic. So it might help you memorize. Openness is part of it, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. So you should already know by now what extroversion and neuroticism is. If you don't know the other few definitions, you can type in Big Five personalities. And then once you type in Big Five personality, you can see what openness means. Prefers practical routine / routine versus imaginative and spontaneous. So how open is that person? Conscientious. Are they impulsive or disorganized, or are they very disciplined and careful? If they're high in conscientiousness, they're going to be very disciplined and a careful person, right? Extroversion. Are they reserved and thoughtful, or are they more sociable and fun-loving? Some people love other people, right? So they're more extroverted is what we say. They're high in extroversion, right? Agreeableness. Suspicion versus uncooperative versus trusting and very helpful. So some people are very agreeable in teams, right? They trust their other team members to do the work. They're very helpful. They're very agreeable, in other words. And then neuroticism. You can be high in neuroticism where you're very anxious, pessimistic. They say on Reddit all the time that premeds are very high in neuroticism. They're very anxious about things. They're very anxious about the 2% on their test or whatever, the 5% on their test. So they're high in neuroticism, high in anxiety to do well on tests, for example. So that is an example of neuroticism. So whether or not you're high or low on these is not necessarily, you can't really think of it in personality traits. You can't really think of it as like good or bad. They're all good or bad, and in a combination, they're all good and bad in different ways, right? So if your personality happens to be low openness, high conscientious, low extroversion, high agreeableness, high neuroticism, that's just an idea of that makes you who you are, but it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. Whether you think your conscientiousness, your level of conscientiousness is a good or bad thing, is just subjective, right? Your personality just is a personality, and it doesn't determine whether you're a good student or a bad student, right? This is just your personality, and this is the big five theory for it. Okay. Three basic traits. So this is another trait theory. So trait theory says for three basic traits says that you have cardinal traits, central traits, and secondary traits. So cardinal are traits around which a person organizes their life. Central traits are major characteristics of personality, and secondary traits are more like smaller personal characteristics that you have. I recommend just going through examples of what might a cardinal trait be. Like find example of central, and find example of secondary traits. That will help. If you can't find examples, just do practice questions. Social cognitive perspective, individuals react with their environment in a cycle called reciprocal determinism. Remember that term? People mold their environments according to their personality, and those environments turn to shape their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Cool. Then we have behaviorist perspective here. A personality develops as a result of operant conditioning. So remember, behaviorists are like Steiner. I don't know why they didn't go over B.F. Steiner, but here's B.F. Steiner. This review sheet, by the way, is not a good review sheet if you've never taken a psychology course in your life. This review sheet is good if you have and you just want to review literally, right? Because if you're not understanding these concepts, you want to go back to a more structured review, such as a textbook, right? And learn it from the textbook. A lot of university courses are based off of big textbooks. A lot of professors would just say, do chapters 2 and 3, and then we'll have a test on them, right? So if you're having trouble learning all this stuff, then go back to a textbook. So behaviorist perspective is that you learn from operant conditioning. So this is B.F. Skinner, and he's kind of like who I learned was almost basically like the founder almost of operant conditioning, and he would like condition a lot of animals to do certain things. So he learned that animals do something for reward, basically, right? So this rat will do something for rewards, increase behavior. So this rat will do something for food, right? So that's what behaviorist perspective is, that you're doing something in order for like a reward and to avoid punishment, basically, right? Okay, so then we have biological perspective. Behavior can be explained as a result of also genetic expression. I think that is a self-explanatory definition. Here are some pictures for Ford's theory, by the way. Okay, I'm going to take a break and then we'll get into psychological disorders. Okay. I'm hoping to finish all of this course with people. Okay. Okay, so the types of psychological disorders. Now we're on psychological disorders. This is a new whole like chapter basically. So disorders. So what's schizophrenia? Let's start there. There's a prototypical disorder with psychosis. Just know that. Positive symptoms versus negative symptoms. So when they say there's positive symptoms, it means it's adding something to your behavior. So it adds something to your normal behavior, right? So if you have delusions or hallucinations, that's something included when you have schizophrenia, right? But if you have negative symptoms, it means it's subtracting something from your normal behavior. So affect and abolition. Disturbances. Okay. So schizophrenia, positive and negative symptoms. All right. Yeah, I actually thought those examples didn't really help. You can look at this picture instead. So positive symptoms, something is being added. So you have disorganized speech, hallucinations, delusions, and then negative symptoms, meaning it's taking away. So it's making your emotions more flattened. It's reducing speech. It's taking away negative symptoms, taking away. Okay. Depressive disorders include major depressive disorder and seasonal affective disorder. So you want to know what is major depressive disorder. So you search it up online. There should be a definition for major depressive disorder. And then if you search up seasonal affective disorder, this is what we know as like when people say, oh, you're sad because it's winter time or it doesn't look nice outside. So you have seasonal depressive disorder, commonly starting in the late fall and winter when there's less sunlight. It's also known as seasonal depression. So know those two definitions. Major depressive disorder at least has one major depressive episode. Persistent depressive disorder has dysthymia for at least 2 years. That doesn't meet criteria for major depressive disorder. Seasonal affective disorder is depression occurring in the winter / like beginning of fall. So we already went through that. Bipolar and related disorders. So you can have manic or hypomanic episodes. If you're manic versus hypomanic. So if you're manic, you will be, here's a graph that can help you distinguish between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. But if you're manic, here's hypomania. So you have restlessness, risky, impulsive, all this stuff. Mania is abnormal state of elated state, but hypomania is abnormal, but a milder mania. So hypomania is still like mania, but it's just milder. Mania is overall in general just this elevated state, right? So know what mania is, and I'll help you understand what hypomania is. And so people with bipolar and related disorders will have manic or hypomanic episodes. So periods of time, episodes are periods of time basically, where they're in a manic state or hypomanic state, right? Bipolar 1, bipolar 2, bipolar 1 has at least one manic episode, so bipolar 1 should have one manic episode at least. Bipolar 2 has at least one hypomanic episode and one depressive episode. So bipolar 2 should have this depressive episode, one manic one. This picture, I don't know, it's not the best picture. Maybe this picture is a little better, I don't know. Cyclothymic disorder, hypomanic episodes with dithymia. So dithymia, I just wanted to go over what it is, and it's a continuous form of long-term depression. Okay, anxiety disorders include general anxiety disorders, phobia, social anxiety disorder, agoraphobia, and panic disorder. You want to know the definition of each of these. So generalized anxiety disorder is just like what you think it is anxiety disorder. Phobia means like you have a specific fear of something. Like I have a phobia of spiders, right? So I have a specific fear of spiders, for example. Social anxiety disorder, you're scared of certain social situations. Agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is anxiety where you fear and avoid places that make you feel trapped or embarrassed. So you're avoiding social situations in a way, right? That's agoraphobia. And then panic disorder. So you want to know what these mean. Obsessive compulsive disorder. This is where you have obsessions and you have compulsions. So in this one, really understand the theory, you want to do practice questions and know that you want to be able to identify when people give you an example, you want to be able to identify what is their obsession and what is the person's compulsion. So they might give you here. Let's see, obsessions. Example practice question. So here's an example practice question, right? So a 26-year-old individual experienced persistent intrusive fear that they left their front door unlocked and that a burglar would break in and harm their family. To temporarily relieve the overwhelming anxiety causing by this thought, they walk back to the front door and check the lock exactly 7 times in a row. So you want to be able to identify in this situation, like what is their obsession and what is their compulsion. So this is what you want to be able to do on the test as well. So know what it means to have an obsession. So this person has, obsession is basically the thought that drives your compulsion, that drives the behavior. So what is the behavior? The person is exactly locking the locks exactly 7 times in a row. That is their compulsion. That's basically their behavior. What is their obsession? Their obsession is basically that someone will harm their family because a burglar will break in, right? So this thought is causing anxiety and the behavior is then happening, right? So the answer is that their obsession is intrusive fear, right? It's whatever they're thinking kind of thing. Compulsion is whatever they're doing about that thinking. So this person is then checking the lock 7 times, right? So this is a good example here. Okay, now we can go on to body dysmorphic disorder, unrealistic negative evaluations of one's appearance. So to put this more as an example for everyone in the society right now, we live in a world where unfortunately like a lot of young boys and girls are living in an online age where they're able to compare, for example, their physical appearance to other people online who are oftentimes edited. They're oftentimes maybe for the men, they might be on steroids and lifting weights, and a lot of young boys look up to that. Unrealistic standards is what I'm saying. So these children might grow up to have body dysmorphic disorder because of that. So they're having unrealistic negative evaluation of their own appearance because they're always seeing, online that, these impossible standards. So they're comparing, and then now they have an unrealistic negative evaluation of their own bodies, right? So that's an example of body dysmorphic disorder, right? PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder is what PTSD stands for. There are intrusive symptoms such as flashbacks and nightmares. So if you ever watched a movie with war soldiers in general who come back from war, they might have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, where they get flashbacks and nightmares, reoccurring due to the stress and trauma that they've been through, right? And then dissociative disorders. So dissociative disorders are kind of like not really remembering who you are almost. So dissociative amnesia, you can't recall your past experiences. Dissociative fugue is that you assume a new identity. So you just become someone else totally. Dissociative identity disorder is when you have multiple personalities. Depersonalization says derealization disorder is when you're feeling detached from your mind or body or environment. So yeah, know these disorders and try to be able to give examples of what the disorders are. Okay, somatic and symptom related disorders involve significant bodily symptoms. So somatic symptom disorder, also known as a somatoform disorder, a somatic symptom causes disproportionate concern. Illness anxiety disorder is when you're preoccupation with thoughts about having or coming down with an illness. So sometimes this happens with a lot of people, right? So we might have this small illness And then we're thinking all the time, oh, it might be really big, it might be really big. So this is illness anxiety disorder, where you're so anxious about your illness, right? You have a preoccupation with thoughts about having or coming down with an illness. So you're always thinking like, oh, this. So if you had a big illness diagnosed before, you're thinking, what are the ways to improve it? You have anxiety about it. There's things like that. Conversion disorder associated with prior trauma. It involves unexplained symptoms resulting in loss of body function. Hypochondriasis, illness anxiety disorder, that's another name for it. One strongly believes he or she has a serious illness despite having no or few symptoms. I think there's a new updated name for this I recommend going through like Anki to help you again, Pancal, the Anki, to kind of give you more terms, because there's definitely more terms to learn and stuff like that. Personality disorders, patterns of inflexible maladaptive behavior that cause distress or impaired function. So personality disorders come in clusters A, B, and C. You remember that cluster A is kind of weird. So you have paranoid, schizotypal, schizoid. Actually, here's a picture. So just memorize this picture then for personality disorder clusters. So this has to do with this picture right on the right side here. Understanding psych disorders. So behaviorist approach is classical and operant conditioning. So like we already went through classical and operant conditioning, so you should know by now what those are, and give an example of classical and operant conditioning. You should be able to do that. Shapes the disorder, behaviorist approach. Then you have a biomedical approach, where you take into account physical and medical causes of this disorder. So an example of taking into account physical and medical causes is thinking about what are literally the physical and medical causes to why this person has these psychological disorders. Biopsychosocial involves biological, psychological, and social components. So things that happen within the environment/society. Psychodynamic approach is Freud psychoanalysis. Remember I told you psychoanalysis is always Freud. Psychoanalysis is always Freud. Psychoanalysis is always Freud. Okay, DSM-5, what is that? It's basically a book, right? It's just a book, but it's called A Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So it's a special book about mental disorders, and a lot of psychologists use it to categorize mental disorders based off of symptoms. So it's a book. It's like a manual for psychologists to know what's going on in terms of psychological disorders. Biological basis. So there is some biological reason for why these disorders happen. So some people have genetic factors for schizophrenia, for instance. They might have birth trauma. They might have marijuana use, family history of schizophrenia, so then they get schizophrenia. People with depression, for example, they might be higher in glucocorticoids. They have low norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. So these are all these like hormone chemicals, sorry, in your and that have a biological. Depression shows that depression has a biological basis. For bipolar disorders, might be high in norepinephrine and serotonin, but it also can be heritable, meaning it's genetic, right? Alzheimer's can also be genetic. It also is associated with brain atrophy, which means like your brain is atrophy and is like deteriorating. So if you ever see muscle atrophy versus let's see, muscle atrophy. No. And then lower acetylcholine, senile plaques of amyloid fluid. Don't this lowered acetylcholine is pretty high yield for Alzheimer's, by the way. Senile plaques of beta amyloid. This you should know that plaque. You don't have to know senile. I don't even really know what senile means. But you need to know plaques of beta amyloid kind of build up in this person's brain with Alzheimer's. You need to know that plaques of beta amyloid build up in a person's brain with Alzheimer's. Parkinson's is bradykinesia, resting tremor, pinbony tremor, mass-like faces, hallway rigidity, and shuffling gait. So shuffling gait is like when you're walking and it's not very smooth. Always remember that Parkinson's is defined by like unsmooth movements. So you're having tremors, meaning your hands are like shaky, right? You have shuffling gait, so you have trouble like walking smoothly. And this is you want to memorize that Parkinson, low dopamine. That's a biological basis of it. Unit 8 now that we're about to discuss and going to transition into is sociology. So we're kind of thinking about people's behavior in terms of groups. So part of sociology will be in your like first year classes of psychology in university. But if you haven't taken it before, that's fine. There's also always new stuff to learn anyways. So if you're gonna learn new stuff, you might as well learn it all, right? So there you go. So that's what we're heading into now. So social process, attitudes, and behavior. So group psychology. Let's try to go through it very quickly. So social facilitation. It means the tendency of people to perform at a different level when others are around. So when others are around, people perform differently. De-individualization, a loss of self-awareness in large groups. So once you are in a large group, you start to become you start to lose yourself essentially, and you kind of be someone different, honestly. bystander effect is basically when you're in a group, people are less likely to respond to a person in need. So let's say there was a person in need and there was 400 people around this person. This person really needed help. The other person is probably thinking, oh, the next person will help, the next person will help, but no one is actually helping. And in this instance, you're seeing a bystander effect where in a group, individuals less likely to respond to a person in need. So in a crowd of people, a lot of people are not going to respond, unfortunately. Peer pressure. The social influence placed on individuals by others they considered equals. You should know peer pressure, right? Social loathing. Social loathing. An individual does not pull his or her weight in a group setting. That happens all the time. You can think of your own personal examples. Polarization, the tendency toward making decisions in a group that are more extreme. So in a group, there might be what we call group polarization. So the group will try to make decisions that are really big, really risky almost, right? So this is a polarization, very extreme decisions. Instead of just, being liberal or being, instead of being liberal or conservative, maybe you're on the liberal, maybe the group tends to be more extreme on their beliefs and values and what they're going to decide. So that's polarization. So instead of being like mildly liberal, they're very liberal or something like that, right? So that's just an example. You don't have to use liberal or conservative as an example, though. Groupthink, the tendency for groups to make decisions based on ideas and solutions that arise within the group without considering outside ideas. And then you have culture. Also, groupthink is a pretty big term to know, so make sure you know this. Culture, the beliefs, ideas, behaviors, and characteristics of or society. Assimilation, the process by which an immigrant or minority takes up elements of mainstream culture. So assimilation means like if you ever studied indigenous culture, they actually did something called forced assimilation to many of the children, indigenous children. So and I studied that a lot as well in school, where assimilation happened, where basically they had to change their ways, their culture, to be able to be more like the mainstream culture. So your hair, it comes down from your haircuts all the way down to the way you're educated. That's assimilation. So and the immigrant, for example, will go to a new country and they have to assimilate to the mainstream culture. So that's assimilation. It is a specific type of socialization. To experience assimilation, a person must have first their own culture, then absorb elements of a new culture. Multiculturalism, so the encouragement of multiple cultures within a community to enhance diversity. So I'm in Canada right now, and we are very a multicultural country, right? That's an example I can give. Subcultures, a group of people within a culture that distinguish themselves from the primary culture. So for example, subculture could be this is a great big group of population, then you have like a skater population, and within even the skater population you might even have another subculture within that, where I don't know, they're like fashion fashionistas or something, and they dress a certain way, I don't know. Attitudes and behavior, attitudes or tendencies towards expression or positive or negative feelings or evaluations about something. So the main thing you want to remember about attitudes is not only its definition, but you want to know these three components. Attitudes can have an affective component, they have a behavioral component, and a cognitive component. Affective, cognitive, behavioral, attitude. So this is also known as the ABC model of attitude. So affective means your feelings and emotions, behavioral means your actions, intentions, and cognitive means your thoughts and beliefs. So there you go. Functional attitude series states that there are 4 functional areas of attitudes: knowledge, ego expression, adaptability, and ego defense. Another theory to learn. I know there's a lot of theories. Learning theory states that attitudes are developed through forms of learning, direct contact, direct interaction, direct instruction, conditioning. Elaboration likelihood model. This is a model where there are different routes of information processing on the degree of elaboration. So central route processing, peripheral route processing. The best way to learn this one, elaboration likelihood route model, look at a picture. Apparently this picture is okay. So elaboration likelihood model is used a lot in like what I like to think of persuasion. So like business wants to advertise something, right? So there's 2 routes that the message or the advertisement could go through, right? It could go through the central route where you have that more deeper processing and focus on the quality of the message. And the peripheral route is more like superficial processing. It's focusing on the cool, I don't know, visual effects of the message. Like there was cool animations on the advertisement, for example. And that outcome of persuasion, if you have a deep message but the visual effects weren't that good, right? You might still have a good persuasion outcome leading to lasting change that resists fading and counterattacks. So what that means is the person's not really doubting your message, your persuasion attempt. But if you have more of a peripheral central processing, it's going through more peripheral for people, then the persuasion outcome is this temporary change. So people are like, oh, that's a really cool animation video. So they're superficially processing the message. They're not actually processing the quality of your message, the quality of your arguments, your advertisement, for example, but they're processing more like, oh, the video was short and sweet and it looked cool. Right? And then that's a temporary change that's susceptible to fading and counterattack. So that was cool, but I didn't really think this product might not be good. That's a counterattack. So it's like you haven't really fully convinced someone, right? So that's a peripheral route. So you can go through those 2 routes: central route processing, peripheral route processing. That's elaboration likelihood model. Social cognitive theory states that attitudes are formed through watching other personal factors in the environment. People change their behavior attitudes based on observation. Okay, so that's pretty obvious. Socialization is a process of internalizing social norms and values expected in one society. So there's sanctions. So You can have positive sanction or negative sanction. So in positive sanctions, it's a reward for a certain behavior. So the way you want to learn this is an example. So give yourself examples. So you can have a positive sanction where in society you're rewarded for your behavior. I don't know. An example I can give is like if you finish your education, you get a degree, and that's considered your reward almost. So that's a positive sanction. A negative sanction is punishment for a certain behavior. Okay, if I run a stoplight, then I might get some sort of negative sanction, a punishment for my behavior, right? That's a negative sanction. Formal sanction, informal sanction. Know the definitions of this. Formal sanction just means it's official. It's an official reward or punishment. Official, in my examples that I gave earlier are both like pretty much official. Informal means a sanction does not enforce or punish by authority, but occurs in everyday interactions with other people. So, example, asking someone to lower their voice in a movie theater. So it's not an official rule like that people at the movie theater need to be quiet, right, or be quieter so other people can watch the movie. But it is an informal sanction that society has that you should lower your voice in a movie theater. Norms are determine the boundaries of acceptable behavior within a society. Mores are informal norms, basically. And then you want to go through examples yourself to make sure you understand. Folkways are informal norms that are less significant, but they still do shape our daily lives. So there's right and rude, and there's right and wrong. So right and wrong is your mores, and the right and rude is your folkways. Taboos. Taboos are considered unacceptable by almost every culture. Examples are given here. Stigma, the extreme disapproval or dislike of a person based on perceived differences from the rest of society. So there might be a negative stigma towards people who are a different sexuality than most people, right? So most of society has female-male relationships, but people who are in homosexual relationships might face stigma, right? Extreme disapproval or dislike of a person or group based on perceived differences from the rest of society. Also, there's a typo right here. Deviance, violation of norms, rules, or expectations in a society. So that means when you deviate, it's meaning you're deviating from the society norms. Differential association theory deviance can be learned. Okay. So if you're always around people who commit crimes, you will learn that, right? Conformity, changing beliefs or behaviors in order to fit into a group. So you're trying to conform. Compliance, when individuals change their behavior based on the request of others. Based on the request. Obedience, a change of behavior based on a command from someone seen as an authority figure. So you want to know the difference between the two because they might seem very similar. So obedience is more like you're listening to someone that is more authoritative to you. So you're listening to their command. Compliance is when you're changing behavior of the request of others. Compliance versus obedience. You want to know the difference between this. So obedience is when you do as others command you to do. Compliance is when you do as others want you to do. And conformity is what you do as others do. So this is actually a good picture here. So these three can be easy to confuse. Don't confuse them. And have examples for yourself so that they're easy to remember instead of just memorizing pure facts. Okay, elements of social interaction. We're on behavioral sciences 9 now. Status. Status is a position in society used to classify individuals. Ascribed status is something you involuntarily assign to. Involuntary means you're just assigned to this because you were born that way. So things like race, gender, ethnicity, those are your ascribed status. Achieved status is something you voluntarily earned. So for example, you are a lawyer. That is your achieved status. You achieve that. You voluntarily earned that. For example, race, gender, and ethnicity is something you didn't voluntarily earn. You just born that way. So that's why we call it ascribed status. You just ascribed that way. Master status is the status by which an individual is primarily identified. So if I primarily identify myself as a stay-at-home mom, then my master status is a mother, right? That's the status by which I am primarily identified. Everyone call me mom, 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 mom. For example, role, a set of beliefs, values, and norms that define the expectations of certain status in a situation. So role is kind of literally like the role that you take on. I recommend getting examples of that too. Role performance refers to carrying out behaviors of that given role. Role partner is an individual who helps define a specific role within the relationship. Role set, a set of roles that are associated with a status. Role conflict and role strain. These two are really big yield, high yield too. I'm gonna highlight it so that you pay attention now. So role conflict and role strain can be very easy to very easy to like confuse, right? But role conflict is difficulty managing multiple roles at once. So role conflict is like, I'm a student, I'm also a part-time whatever, working a job as a retail employee. I am also a mother, for example. So you're having role conflict because you're having difficulty managing multiple roles at once. Role strain is different from role conflict. Role strain is difficulty managing just one role. So within the role of a student, I have multiple tasks. As a student, I have due dates, I have projects, I have blah blah blah. I have to attend classes. So that's the difficulty managing one role. That's role strain. But difficulty managing multiple roles is your role conflict. So don't get these two confused. Groups two or more people with similar characteristics, same sense of unity, peer group, self-selected group formed around self-interest. You can think of that as like your friend group almost. Family group to which you're born to, adopted or married, kinship, affinal kinship, and consanguineous kinship. I don't know how to say it, but you have to know these two different types of kinship. So consanguineous is related through blood. So in other words, you're like family. Affinal kinship is related by choice. So in other words, like your friends almost, right? Where are we at? All right, in-group and out-group. It's also important to know the difference between the two. In-group is the group you're in. Out-group is the group you compete with or oppose, so you're not really in that group, you don't really affiliate with them. Reference group is a group you compare yourself to. Primary group, those that contain you have strong emotional bonds to. Secondary group is you just have weaker bonds to these people. So this might be something like your coworkers, unless you're really, strong emotional bonds with your coworkers, but, it could be classmates, for example. Maybe that's a better example, weaker bonds. Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft, literally, these are definition terms to just memorize. Groupthink occurs when members begin to conform to another's views and ignore outside perspectives. Network, an observable pattern between individuals or groups. Organization, you can read this definition, a group with identifiable membership that engages in certain action to achieve a common purpose. So organizations are all around us, basically companies almost. Bureaucracy, a rational system of admin, discipline, and control. So Max Weber gave it 6 defining characteristics. So here, you need to know these characteristics. So division of labor, authority, hierarchy, formal selection and personality, formal rules and regulations, career orientation. And then you want to go through the definitions of those two. And iron law of oligarchy, democracy or bureaucracy system naturally shift to being ruled by an elite group. Sect is a religious group that arose from a split from a larger religion, sect. So you want to memorize those. Self-preservation and interaction with others. So basic model of expressing emotion states that universal emotions and expressions can be understood across cultures. Social construction model of expressing emotions states that emotions are solely based on situational context of social interactions. Display rules are unspoken rules that govern expression of emotions. This is also important. So you want to give yourself example of this too. So for example, an unspoken display rule in, Asia might be different than in America, to express your emotion or, so give yourself examples of that. Do practice questions. Impression management refers to maintenance of public image, which is accomplished through various strategies, flattery, boasting, blah, blah, blah. Basically, everyone tries to manage their public image. It's this theory of impression management. And then dramaturgical approach is that people create images of themselves in the same way that actors perform a role in the front stage. So if you ever notice people in the public, they actually act differently than how they do in the private. So how I act in the private is known as my backstage. How am I personally in my backstage? I am very like different in my backstage than I am in my front stage, where you are seen by an audience. In other words, where you're in public. So your private self is different from your public self, basically, and that's a dramaturgical approach. So your backstage might be very laid back. You're wearing, casual clothing. You're in a casual mindset as well. Front stage is different, right? So your public self might be different. So you have a different front stage. Verbal communication, communicating through spoken, written, or signed words. That's obvious. Versus non-verbal communication means communicating by means of other things other than words. So you use your body language, prosody, or gestures. Animal communicate. I don't know about prosody though, because I don't know necessarily about that. Animal communication takes place not only between non-human animals, but between animals and other animals. So just know that term. Okay, how much do we have left? 3 more. Hopefully I can get through that without interruption. All right. So now we're on social thinking. So how do people behave and socially think in group settings? Behavioral science is 10. So social behavior is interpersonal attraction. What is that? It's what makes people like each other. So everyone has interpersonal attraction to different people, influenced by physical attractiveness. It can be the similarity of thoughts you have with someone, the physical traits with someone, self-disclosure, and reciprocity and proximity. So proximity is a big factor. They say that if you live closer to someone, the more likely you are to have a better, stronger relationship with that person. It happens in all forms of relationships, whether they are friendships or whether they are romantic relationships. One of the biggest indicators of strong interpersonal attraction of friendships and relationships, all types, is proximity. So how close are you geographically to that person is actually a big indicator of how close these people could be. Aggression, a physical, verbal, nonverbal behavior with intention to cause harm or increase social dominance. Attachment, an emotional bond to another person. Usually, in psychology, it actually refers to the bond between a child and caregiver. I know in like movies and stuff, you might see like romantic movies about like attachment and having, that's a different thing than the attachment we're talking about here. The attachment here is usually between the child and caregiver, and they did a lot of studies between a child and caregiver. So if a child had a secure attachment to their caregiver, that means the child shows a strong preference for the caregiver. So there was a study, attachment study. I think her name was Ainsworth. Here, her name was Ainsworth, Mary Ainsworth. There's this cool attachment study she did, where basically they would take away the child from the parent and see what their attachment style was. So children with secure attachment, they would show a stronger preference for the caregiver than to strangers. So what that means is they would basically cry until their caregiver came back, right? Avoidant attachment may occurs when a caregiver has little or no response to a distressed child. So the child doesn't show preference for the caregiver. So the child, it doesn't matter if it was the parent basically doesn't relax them. The caregiver doesn't help them, the child relax. So the child has no preference. Ambivalent attachment to the caregiver occurs when a caregiver has inconsistent response to a child's distress, sometimes responding appropriately, sometimes they're neglectful to the child. So the child will become distressed when the caregiver leaves and is ambivalent when he or she returns, meaning they're like kind of either or. It's kind of like a confused thing, 50-50, I guess. But yeah, disorganized attachment is when it occurs when a caregiver is erratic or abusive. The child shows no clear pattern of behavior in response to the caregiver's absence or presence. So the child actually does not know how to respond at all. It doesn't know whether it's going to cry. It doesn't know whether it's going to be satisfied when the caregiver is around because the caregiver is so erratic or abusive. So this is attachment in social behavior. If you want to watch a video, there's good videos on the attachment study and the attachment theory, so you should watch those as well if you're still confused. Social support is when you perceive your value that is cared for by a social network. So you have a social network that's helping you out. Emotional support is when you listen and affirm and empathize with someone else's feelings. Esteem the support, affirm qualities and skills of a person. Material support, providing physical, monetary support. Informational support is providing information to a person. So all this supports the support, right? Network support, providing sense of belonging to a person. Okay, foraging, searching for and exploiting food resources. Food, foraging, food. F for food. The mating system describes the way in a group is behave in terms of sexual behavior, monogamy, and polygamy. So these are different mating systems, all of these. So mating systems could be monogamy, so your exclusive mating relationship. So you are exclusive with somebody, that's monogamy. So mono for one, right? One to one, right? Polygamy. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Polygamy. One member of the sex having multiple exclusive relationships with members of the opposite. So if a male has multiple female mates, that's polygyny. I don't know how to say it right. And then if a female has multiple mates, that's called polyandry, right? Okay, promiscuity means there's no exclusivity in the relationship at all. So that's another like mating system. Mate choice is selection of mate based on attraction and traits. Altruism. Altruism is helping behavior in which a person's intent is to benefit someone else at the cost to him or herself. So an example of altruistic behavior is firefighters. Firefighters. Why are they so altruistic? It's because they risk their lives in order to save other people. So that's the basic definition of altruism, right? Helping behavior in which the person's attempt is to benefit someone else at the cost of him or herself. So firefighters are trying to benefit other people, trying to save their lives in very dangerous scenarios, right? There's fire in the house and there's dangerous carbon monoxide or whatever. There's dangerous air and they're risking their lives at the cost of him or herself. That is altruism. Okay, next. Game theory attempts to explain decision making between individuals as if they're participating in a game. This is also related to the prisoner's dilemma that we talked about earlier, very early on. Prisoner's dilemma. All right. Inclusive fitness, a measure of an organism's success in its own population based on how well it propagates its own genes. So inclusive fitness also includes the ability of those offspring to then support others. So inclusive fitness is basically, an organism is saying that, an organism is successful if it's able to propagate its own genes, meaning then it's able to have children. So you as a person, it's saying in this theory of inclusive fitness, you have children, right? And then, so that's you propagating your genes. That's basically what that means. So you have children and then your offspring, which are your children, to then support others, meaning they're then, they can do other stuff in their lives. So that is inclusive fitness, a measure of an organism's success. And that is how they measure the success. You're able to have children and those children are able to support others as well. Okay, social perception of behavior. Social perception, the way that we generate impressions about other people, perceiver, target, and situations. You want to know those definitions for them. I don't think they're incredibly high yield, but you need to know like basic terminology, right? Social capital, the practice of developing, maintaining relationships that form social networks, willingness to help each other. So if I form another relationship with a friend who's a lawyer that can teach me about copyright, I'm gaining social capital. If I meet a friend in business that knows a lot about marketing and I can learn from them and in different ways, I'm gaining more social capital. So I'm gaining and developing relationships that form social networks willing to help each other. So we're willing to help each other in different ways, right? Implicit personality theory. When we look at someone for the first time, we pick up on one of their traits. We then take the characteristic and assume other traits about the person based off the trait we first picked up on. So basically making assumptions about the person almost. Cognitive biases. There's different cognitive biases that people have. So this is also high yield, and you should know each and every of these cognitive biases. So primacy effect is a cognitive biases that people have, where, here, I'll just search up cognitive biases. So let's see if we have some here, like a list of them. Cognitive biases is basically another way of saying the heuristics that we were talking about very much earlier. So I would go back to heuristics and understand those. Those are like mental shortcuts, right? And cognitive biases are basically like that. So for example, confirmation bias is a big one. Availability bias is a big one. So availability bias distorts our view based on the most immediate information that readily comes to mind. So that's also a heuristic. Confirmation bias tends to interpret new evidence to validate one's existing beliefs. So those are basically examples, but you need to know each and every of these definitions. So you know what? I'll just go through them. Primacy effect. Do I have time to go through them? Not really. Primacy effect is refers to psychological phenomena whereby people remember the first thing in the sequence rather than the things that come after it. So if you ever learned about this, this is a good picture where if you are given a list of words, right? So primacy and recency effect, you can learn together. So primacy is like you're given a list of words, you remember the first things on that list. Recency effect means you remember also the last things on the list because they're most recent information that you just learned, and so that you're able to memorize those stuff better. That's a primacy and recency effect basically. Reliance on central traits, halo effect. Let's go through halo effect. What else do you have to go through? Just world hypothesis. Okay, halo effect is when one trait of a person is used to make overall judgment about someone. So there's a lot of examples of halo effect. You could just search it up. Just world hypothesis is belief that, everyone, what goes around comes around. Everyone deserves what they got. So this says you deserved it. You killed a fly. So this person's getting like karma. So just world hypothesis. It's like a belief where if you're like a good person, good things will happen. If you're a bad person, bad things will happen. That's a just world hypothesis and one of the cognitive biases that we have. Self-serving bias is another one. Self-serving bias is basically where you believe that if you do something good, here, this is a better picture. So yay, A+, I'm so smart. So you attribute good things that happen to you as traits that you have, like you're smart. All right. But if you get an F, it's due to external factors or negative events. So here, this is a good picture. So self-serving bias is basically accrediting good things with your internal factors. Like, oh, I got an A+, so I'm smart. That's an internal factor, being smart, right? You're attributing that to your personality there, or your ability there. And then, but the next test you got an F, and then you attribute that to external factors. You said, oh, the teacher's bad, right? So that's a self-serving bias that people can have. All right, attribution theory focuses on tendency for individuals to infer the causes of others people's behavior. Dispositional, internal causes causes of behavior are internal. Situational means external. So think about like context, think about external surroundings, right? Correspondent interference theory focuses on intentionality of a person's behavior. So when someone unexpectedly does something that either helps or hurts us, we form a dispositional attribution. We correlate the action to the person's personality. Fundamental attribution error, this is a big one. This is also another kind of like cognitive bias, and it's a bias toward making dispositional. I don't know why the review sheet's a little disorganized, to be honest. The bias towards making dispositional attributions rather than situational. So what it means in regard to the actions of others, right? So if you saw somebody and they're like, there's a lot of good examples. So fundamental attribution error, here's a good example. So others, internal factors. This is your fault, and this here, whatever this bag of milk, whatever is spilled. And then when we do it ourselves, we said, oh, it's just the wind. That's not our fault. It's just the wind. But when others do it, you say, oh, that's your fault. You dropped the bag, and this happened, right? So this is a good picture of fundamental attribution error. Attributional substitution occurs when individuals make judgments that are complex, but instead substitute a simpler solution or heuristic. So yeah, using basically our cognitive bias and heuristics to deal with stuff, right? And make judgments. Active observer bias is tendency to attribute your own actions to external causes and others' actions to dispositional causes. So, actor observer bias. So, here's example of actor observer bias. All right, now we're going to go on to stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, right? So stereotypes are all cognitives, just our thinking, and occur when attitudes and impressions are made based on a limited amount and superficial information, and we form basically judgments of other people. Self-fulfilling prophecy, when stereotypes lead to expectations, and those expectations create conditions that lead to confirmation of that stereotype. Self-fulfilling prophecies. Stereotype threat, concern or anxiety about confirming a negative stereotype about one's social group. Prejudice is affective. Okay, so you want to know the difference between what's a stereotype, what's a prejudice, and what's discrimination. I have to remove all of these pictures here. This is getting too cluttered. All right, so you have stereotypes, which are cognitive, they're thoughts, right? You have prejudice, which is affective. This is like an attitude, right, toward it could be negative or positive. But once this person starts, for example, throwing trash at someone else, that's now a behavioral discrimination. So actually treating others differently because of that. So you could start in your mind with a stereotype, like a judgment, right? Everybody naturally has stereotypes because they're cognitive, right? And then prejudice. People will naturally have prejudice, might naturally have prejudice, and they're just a positive or negative attitude toward, with that stereotype. So it's building on that. And then when you have a prejudice, let's say you have a negative attitude, you might treat somebody negative based on that prejudice. And that's now discrimination. That's now behavioral, right? So let's say I have a negative attitude. So this stereotype, based on this person's limited information I have about this person, I made a stereotype. And then I had a prejudice, meaning a negative attitude toward that person or group. And then let's say I did something very negative toward them, then that's discrimination now, and that's a behavioral thing, right? So that's a way to learn it. Ethnocentrism. So now we're going to go into these other terms here. Ethnocentrism refers to the practice of making judgments about someone's other culture, about other cultures based on our own culture, right? So we're very ethnocentric. Cultural relativism refers to recognition of other cultures that should be studied on their own terms. What does it mean? So it's basically like if I study a culture, I can study it in an ethnocentric way, where I'm comparing their culture with what I know about my own culture, right? Or I can study in a cultural relativism kind of way, where I'm just studying this culture as a unit by itself. I'm not comparing it to other culture. I'm just studying this culture by itself. Okay, unit 11. So we're almost done, just 2 pages literally. So we're on unit 11, behavioral science 11, social structure and demographics. So this should run pretty fast. Functionalism. So we already talked about functionalism before, but the functionalism in sociology is kind of different. So we have some theories in sociology that are different. So the theory in sociology about functionalism is that you can have manifest functions or latent functions, and this focus on the function of society. So manifest functions are deliberate actions that help to serve a system, right? And you can find a lot of examples in your own life about that, right? Unexpected, unintended, or unrecognized consequences of manifest actions or latent functions. So you didn't know that would happen, but it happened anyway, right? Conflict theory is based off of works of Karl Marx, and conflict theory focuses on power differentials, right, to maintain social order. So how groups compete for resources to attain power and superiority. So they're in conflict with each other, right? So one group might be the rich and powerful, another group might be, working wages, right? So lower power, superiority, and they're in conflict with each other. Conflict sociology, the study of way that distinct groups compete for resources. Symbolic interactionism, study of ways individuals interact through shared understanding of words, gestures, and other symbols. So the meaning of social symbols. Microsociology, the study of expression, symbolic gestures, and other small individual components of society. Social constructionism explores the ways in which individuals and groups make decisions to agree upon a given social reality, the value they place on social constructs. Social constructivism focuses on altering that constructed view. Rational choice theory. So a lot of theories that you need to know in sociology basically states that individuals will make decisions that maximize the benefit and minimize harm. Expectancy theory applies rational theory but within groups. Feminist theory explores the way in which one gender can be subordinated. That gender is in like North America. Feminist theory, we think about that as like female, basically, like how female can be subordinate to men, and that could be negative, right? Social institutions, well-established social structures that dictate certain patterns of behaviors or relationships. So in a social institution, it could be, school is like a social institution. It is a social structure that dictates your pattern of behavior in a relationship. So at school, you would dress a certain way, you would act a certain way, to raise your hand, for instance, how to act as a student and how the teacher should act as a teacher. So there's roles, and that is an institution, a social institution. Another social institution is like your workplace, right? You guys have a different way than how a school structure would be structured, right? So those are different social institution examples. 4 tenets of medicine. This is important to know. This is not only what you should know in medicine, it's 4 tenets of being ethical, really. So beneficence, non-maleficence, respect for autonomy, and justice. So this is not only just for medicine, this is for scientific research in general. I don't know why it says 4 tenets of medicine. I don't know. You don't have to memorize it that way. It's basically 4 tenets of ethics. Okay, so we'll go over the 4 tenets. So the first tenet is autonomy on this list here. So autonomy is that your ability to self-govern yourself and kind of dictate your own, you have free will. So in a research study, I like to think of these in terms, the 4 principles of ethics in terms of research. So when you do scientific research on other people, you want to give them autonomy, which is the freedom to have a choice. So that's why whenever you have a participant in your research study, you also want to give them information about what the research is and a consent, and then you want to give them an option to leave or opt out of your study at any time that they feel uncomfortable or they just don't want to be a part of your study. That's autonomy. You give them the freedom to self-govern. Then you have beneficence, which is acting in the best interest of the person. So yes, you could also apply these in terms of medicine as a practitioner. You can apply that as well, but I like to think of it in terms of research, so I'll give a research example. So beneficence is when you do a research study, for example, you're thinking of and you're testing a new medicine. You want to test a new medicine. You're thinking about how this medicine will positively impact someone. And then let's say your other group is a placebo group, where the only thing that this person can get out of participating in the study is benefits. So that's beneficence. And then non-maleficence is an obligation to do no harm. So for example, this is pretty obvious. Just don't harm anybody. Justice is treating all persons with fairness, equality, and impartiality, compatible with legal statuses. So all your participants, for example, I'm giving research studies still, are treated the same no matter their race, no matter their age, no matter blah blah blah. So for example, in research, you might do randomization of the participants that you have, and then you put them in their conditions, right? Experimental conditions, without discriminating other people. Demographics is the statistics of populations. Most common are ages of race, ethnicity, social orientation, immigration. Fertility rate is the average, so number of children born to women during her lifetime in the population. Birth and mortality rate, so it's the number of births or deaths per 1,000 people per year. Migration is just a movement of people from one place to another. Ethnic migrants, ethnic groups emigrating to more industrialized countries, and they tend to have more fertility and more higher mortality for ethnic migrants. Okay, the demographic transition. You need to know the demographic transition model. Actually, it's a model used to represent drops of birth, so you need to know this and the stages. Demographic transition model. You need to know this and the stages of what's going to happen. So in stage 1, what happens? Birth rate is high, the rate, and then natural increase in the population. So you need to know what's happening at each of the stages. Okay. Social movements organized to promote proactive or resist reactive. You want to know proactive, reactive for social movements. Globalization, the process of integrating global economy with free trade and tapping foreign labor markets. So what does that mean? Globalization is like thinking of the global economy. So now that the internet has opened up, now people have become more globalized, so people are more connected, right? So globalization, integrating global economy. Urbanization, the process of dense areas of population creating a pull for migration. So urbanization is like everybody, this is an area of land, right? This is a country, and everybody joins this side of the country because it has more job opportunities, better land, better everything, right? Everything's close together, food is there, everything is there. That's called urbanization. So it's the process of creating these dense areas. So that's why we call like cities are very urban areas. All right, culture. Culture means it encompasses the lifestyle of a group of people. Material culture versus physical objects, resources that define their culture. Symbolic culture includes the ideas associated with the cultural group. Cultural lag is that material culture changes more quickly than symbolic culture. So for example, technology is defining the culture more than the symbolic culture, because it's developing so fast. Language is spoken or written symbols combined into a system. Value is what a person deems important in life. Belief is something a person considers to be true. Formal ceremonial behavior usually includes symbolism. So rituals usually include a lot of symbolism, right? Norms are societal rules that define the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Okay, now we have the very last page, Behavioral Sciences 12, which is social stratification. So social stratification is a system by which people rank people in a hierarchy. So like low class, middle class, high class. Functional states that social stratification is necessary, and it creates a harmonious equilibrium, right? Social economic status can be ascribed or achieved. We already went through that actually, kind of. Social class is a category of people share with social economic characteristics. For example, lower class, middle class, high class. Prestige is respect and importance tied to specific occupations. For example, doctors and lawyers have a lot of prestige because of their perception of their field, right? Power, the capacity to influence other people. Anomie, lack of social norms or breakdown of social bonds. String theory focuses on anomonic conditions. It can lead to deviance and reinforce social stratification. Social capital is benefits provided by social networks. We already talked about social capital, so we can skip that for now. Meritocracy is important. So it's advancement of social ladders are based on intellectual talent and achievement. So meritocracy, is basically like Harvard, like big institutions. Think of MIT, Harvard, all of these big institutions. If you go to them, it's highlighting this meritocracy kind of term, right? It's highlighting how if you go to these schools, you can then level up your life by intellectual talent and achievement. Social mobility, we're almost done. Social mobility is when it allows one group to acquire higher level employment opportunities by achieving required credentials and experience. Poverty, you can have absolute or relative poverty, and you could go over that. You should know what poverty is. Relative deprivation theory, people seek to acquire something that others possess, which they believe they should have too. So you're not really in poverty, but you believe you need more stuff because relative to other people, you have less, right? So it's all relative. Social reproduction, the passing of social inequality, especially poverty, from one generation to next. Social exclusion, of powerlessness, when individuals feel alienated from the society. Spatial inequality, social stratification across territories. Globalization, we already talked about. I don't know why there's multiple definitions for them, but yeah, we already talked about globalization. And lastly, we're almost done. So epidemiology and disparity. So what is incidence? Incidence means the number of new cases of disease per population at risk. Prevalence is the number of cases of disease per population. Mortality is deaths caused by a given disease. Ethnic migrants is ethnic groups immigrating to more industrialized countries, and they tend to have higher overall mortality and fertility. Morbidity is the burden of degree of illness associated with a given disease. ACA is Affordability, a Care Act, where it attempts to increase health insurance coverage and reduce the cost of healthcare for people. We also have Medicare. This is actually stuff in the US. Covers greater than 65 years old, those with end-stage renal disease, and those with ALS. So ALS is like remember the ice bucket challenge? That's why people were doing it, for people with ALS. Medicaid covers for patients in significant financial need. So this is mostly these three things. We don't have them in Canada, but they are relevant in America because Canada, the healthcare is free. Okay. And that concludes the entire psychology, sociology section. And after that, you can just do your practice questions. And that's it for today. All right. Bye.